Song is work appropriate. It is now, in my opinion. Welcome. Good morning. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We are so excited to kick off this day of learning with each and every one of you. This is the first of 5 sessions we'll have this year, 5 virtual sessions in supporting CSI schools across Nebraska. And today's session is focused on instructional coaching as a tool for school transformation. So if I haven't met you yet, I think I know a good amount of people on this call, but if we haven't had the chance to meet, I'm the one you've been getting emails from. My name is Namisha Thakur. I am a director of academics here at TNTP. I've been at TNTP for about 2 years now, and most of that 2 years has been working with lovely folks in Nebraska. So I've gotten to spend a good amount of time in your beautiful state, and it now has like a very special place in my heart, even though I currently live in Dallas, Texas. So not in the Midwest, but it's a quick 2-hour flight to Omaha. So I feel like I can get in and out of Nebraska pretty easily. And I will pass it off to Nadia and then Abby, my colleagues, to introduce themselves.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nadia Nibs. I currently live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, but I'm visiting my family out in Jersey right now. And similar to Namisha, I've been with TNTP for about 2 years as a senior manager. And for the bulk of those 2 years, I have also been working in the lovely state of Nebraska, and it's been such a treat. And similarly, I feel like I know vast number of you in the call. It's so great to see so many awesome familiar faces, and I'm excited for our content today and in this series. Okay, I pass things over to Abby.
Good morning, y'all. My name is Abby Robinson. I am also a senior manager and have also been at TNTP full-time for about 2 years, though I've supported TNTP in other ways for about 6 years prior to coming full-time. I support academic contracts across the Midwest, which since January has included Nebraska. So I'm a little bit newer to Nebraska, but I'm loving learning with you all, and I'm excited to be here with you guys today.
And before I get too far into anything else, is Shirley on the call?
Good morning. Yes, I'm here. I just wanted to say good morning to everyone. Welcome to this virtual learning space today. I'm super excited you all are here, and those who will be watching the recording of this. As you all see, the intent is to make everything accessible to your colleagues who might not be able to join us today or any other subsequent virtual session. I just ask that, you keep an open mind. You might hear things that maybe you're like, we do this, or like, oh my God, this makes total sense. Like, we should try this, right? Like, keeping an open mind is so important in this work, because I know you all are doing your absolute best with what you have and what you can to support the students and families in your communities. So I just appreciate you taking the time to take out of your super busy days. I know this. And we also want to be responsive, which is why we selected this date and time based off of feedback we've received from you all. So again, thank you. I'll be on for a little while, and I'll be in and out here and there, as you, just how I'm sure some of you may be as well. But thank you again for being here, and I hope you all have a really amazing day of learning and growth. So thanks.
Thank you, Shirley. All right, we're gonna spend a little bit of time up front just making sure we have all of our logistical ducks in a row and everyone has what they need to engage fully today. So as I'm sure you've already gathered, we're gonna be very high tech today and in all of our virtual sessions. So we're gonna take some time up front to get situated. Abby or Nadia, someone is gonna drop a couple of links in the chat in a moment for the sign-in and for the session materials. Please make sure while I'm talking that you have signed in if you haven't already, so that we have a record of your attendance. And then please make sure you've either downloaded or made a copy of the participant handout so that you can use it as a note catcher throughout our session today. And you can find this handout in one of 2 places. Either it is posted to the Google Classroom, so if you have that open and you have access to that, you can find it there. Or if you're still having some Google Classroom issues, we're also sharing just a Google Drive folder here that has the participant handout in it as well. So once you've signed in and you have today's materials open, then we're asking that you just take a quick minute to update your Zoom username with your school, district, or ESU number in parentheses. If you happen to be physically in a room with a bunch of other people, like you're all calling in on one Zoom line, we're asking that you update your username to reflect the school and then the number of people in the room with you in parentheses. So I've put a bunch of examples up here on the slide, and I'm just going to pause for, I see some smiles and I hope it's because of my examples. I hope someone else on this call is like, Percy Jackson, yes. I'm obsessed with the Percy Jackson series. If you haven't read it, you should read it. Yes, it is for children, but it's a great book. So I'm going to pause here for another minute or two just to let everybody, give you some time to get situated. If you need help or finding or accessing anything over the next 2 minutes, just drop a quick note in the chat. All right. So we're going to be covering quite a bit of ground today. And at times, just because of the nature of the content, we might be getting in our feelings a little bit as well. And that's kind of impossible to avoid when we do the work we do in education, and it all feels so personal a lot of the time. But for that reason, we want to make sure that we ground all of our sessions in establishing some community norms for how we show up and how we engage with one another, especially when we're having some potentially tough conversations. Can I get, who do I see on my screen? Kelly from Huntington Elementary. Can you come off mute and read out our first norm for us?
Stay engaged. Sorry, there's two of us in the room. Remain emotionally, intellectually, and socially involved in the dialogue, especially during breakouts and reflections.
Thank you. So on the note of staying engaged, I want to talk briefly about breakout rooms. We're going to have quite a few breakout rooms today, kind of throughout the day, and we're going to move in and out of them fairly quickly. The intention of this is to create a collaborative environment that closely resembles what we might experience if we were all together in person, right? We do a lot of quick, like turn-in talks, table chats. That's the role breakout rooms are going to play for us today. All of your breakout rooms will be randomly assigned, meaning that you might end up in a room with folks from different districts, regions, roles, but we've done this on purpose so that today you have the opportunity to hear some new perspectives and ideas to take back to your context. And many of the breakouts are going to be pretty quick. So we're just asking, in the spirit of staying engaged, that you join rooms promptly and dive right into those conversations about the sort of questions at hand. You're not going to have time in every breakout for a round of introductions. So just know that. That's why changing your Zoom username with kind of where you work will be super helpful for everyone, not just us. All right, can I get, in this order, Andrew Mather, Angie Dickey, and Deidre Amundsen to read out our next three norms. Andrew, Angie, Deidre.
Experience discomfort in moments where you experience competing thoughts or beliefs. Seek to understand what's challenging you and why.
Speak your truth, share your personal truth, experience, and expertise. Avoid saying only what you think others want to hear.
Expect and accept non-closure, focus on the journey, and embrace that disrupting and eliminating inequities is an ongoing process.
Thank you all. Side note, if any of us call on you and we say your name wrong, please correct us. As someone who has a complicated name myself, it is like personally very important to me to get people's names right. So if I say it wrong, call me out. I'm going to pause here for a second just to let these norms kind of simmer for you and give you just a few seconds to think about how you want to show up and engage today. And then make a quick mental commitment to yourself. How do you want to show up today, and what do you want to get out of today? So a note on Zoom facilitation. I'd hazard a guess that most people on this call would prefer live and in-person sessions over Zoom, but when we have CSI schools all over the state, that becomes just logistically really challenging. And we don't want like drive times across the state to be a hindrance for people to engage in this learning. But thankfully, we can still have really meaningful learning experiences and conversations virtually. I'm sure we have all experienced that Zoom can feel impersonal and closed off if we let it, but we are going to do our best to engage you fully, and we're asking the same in return. So just a few notes around Zoom facilitation. When possible, we'd love to see you and for you all to see each other, especially when you're in breakout rooms. Obviously, being all day on camera might be a lot. So if you turn your camera off here and there, especially when one of the facilitators is kind of talking through some slides, that is a-okay. But when you're sharing, or especially when you're in smaller breakout rooms, if you can turn on your video, that would be lovely. We'll also be using a variety of different engagement strategies: cold calls, Zoom polls, Padlets, Jamboards, you name it. There's going to be a lot going on. Everything you need is linked in your participant handout, but if at any point you need a link shared again, do not hesitate to ask. Somebody else probably needs it too. So just pop it in the chat or come off mute. We'll be happy to reshare. And then our main goal for today is that this feels as dynamic and interactive as possible, as if we were in person. So we'll use a few strategies like serial shares, the chat, and breakout rooms. So serial share is what I did earlier with the norms. We'll put a list of names in the chat, or just call out a list of people and ask you to kind of read out or share in that order. And then the chat, I don't want to toot our horns, but we're pretty pro at keeping up with the chat during these virtual sessions. So we'll keep track of your questions, comments. If I'm talking, Nadia or Abby will respond to you in the chat, and vice versa. So please do use that as a space to ask questions, share reactions, have sidebars with each other in the chat around what is being shared. Use that as an interactive space. Are there any questions about any logistics? Okay. So you have hopefully already previewed our full scope and sequence for the year, but if you haven't, that document is also posted to the Google Classroom. I'm just going to give you maybe 20 seconds right now to skim over the year at a glance on this slide to get a sense of the trajectory of CSI support for this year. And feel free to share any questions in the chat. So today is going to be our only full day session. The remaining 4 virtual sessions will be 3 hours each, and we picked Thursday mornings based on the responses we got in the scheduling survey. Starting today, the development sessions will focus on deepening your capacity as the instructional leaders and head instructional coaches of your schools, not just building leaders. So some of you might be sitting there thinking, I don't think of myself as the instructional leader. Our hope is that you start to think of yourself as the instructional leader of your school throughout the course of this series, and that you get some resources and guidance on building your confidence and capacity in that area, if it's not already a strength of yours. We will have one in-person touch point with each CSI school in the fall and one in the spring. So in the fall, that touch point is going to be these regional site visits. And I saw a comment in the chat asking about the logistics of those. We're going to share a little bit more about those site visits in our closing today. So be on the lookout for that. But just to give a high level overview, those regional site visits are going to focus on co-observing lessons at a single school to calibrate ratings and norm on how we talk about strong instruction. And again, we'll share a little bit more about what those logistics will look like in today's closing. And then in the spring, each CSI school that received an academic diagnostic from us this past spring will get another second visit and a second full report. So you'll get that whole academic diagnostic process again. So that is required for not yet exited CSI schools. And this past year, it was optional for the newly identified schools to get a diagnostic. If you are a school that opted out of getting a diagnostic this past spring, but you think you might want one this year, you can still opt in. You'll still have the chance to opt in this year. So just because you didn't get one last year doesn't mean that you can't get one this year. All right, keep the questions coming in the chat, but I'm going to go ahead and move on for the sake of time. All right, here's a quick look at our objectives for today. There's kind of a lot, but it's because we have a full day of learning ahead of us. So we're going to start our day focusing on aligning to a vision for strong instruction and practice using a student-centered observation tool to identify instructional strengths and growth areas. We're going to investigate the impacts of consistent instructional coaching on teacher development and student achievement. We'll explore instructional coaching as a spectrum, defining kind of different types of coaching. We'll reflect on the current conditions of instructional coaching at your school or district or region and start to surface any barriers or entry points for instructional coaching. We'll investigate the role of trust and vulnerability in setting the foundation for effective coaching. And we'll start to define a vision for strong coaching and teacher development at your school. So you should have our intention is that you have a good chunk of time throughout today to really reflect deeply on your own context and establish and clarify your own vision for what you want all of this to look like at your school. All right, enough with all those logistics. We're going to get to what everybody loves, an icebreaker. For this icebreaker, I want you to imagine this scenario. Your shoes have come untied. What are you going to do? You have to tie them, but there's a catch. You're only allowed to use one of 2 sets of tools, either a pair of chopsticks or a tweezer and a spoon. No fingers, hands, feet. You can only use one of these sets of tools. In just a minute, Abby is going to open up a few breakout rooms that are labeled chopsticks or tweezer and spoon. And you're going to opt into a room that corresponds with your choice. So for example, if you're like team chopsticks all the way, you join a breakout room labeled chopsticks. And we'll cap each room at how many people?
10.
10. Okay, we're gonna cap each room at 10. So if there are already 10 people in a breakout, pick a different one. You're gonna choose your own breakout room. With your group, once you're in your breakout, you're gonna have 3 minutes to develop a compelling argument for why your choice is best suited to get the job done. So team chopsticks, you're gonna talk about why are chopsticks the better tool to tie our shoelaces. And then you'll choose a spokesperson to share your case when we come back full group. All right. Abby, let's open those rooms. Opt into a room. If there's already 10 people, please pick a different.
Namisha, mine is not showing me any. Where the heck do I go?
Do you have a breakout rooms like option in your Zoom toolbar?
Oh my gosh. Thank you. I was looking
No
at the wrong
problem.
spot. All
You're good.
right, thanks.
All right, friends, let's hear some of these arguments. Let's get someone from Team Chopsticks Oh, shocking. We only have one chopsticks room. Let's get someone from the chopsticks 1 breakout room to come off mute and make your most compelling argument. Why are chopsticks the best tool for this job?
Okay, well, our group met and there was only 5 of us, so but we thought that you could use the chopsticks, maybe not to tie the knot, but to make the shoes functional, and you could tuck the shoestrings into the shoe, so it's still the shoe's still meeting its function, and we can make that work. And chopsticks seem like a more natural pairing than a tweezers and a spoon. Assuming you can still use your hands, you just can't use your hands to touch the shoestring. The stipulations weren't super specific, so.
Yes, you can use your hands to obviously hold the chopsticks.
Okay,
but-
yep.
Okay. All right. Does anyone else from the chopsticks group want to add to that argument?
I chose because I'm pretty good with chopsticks, and so it's kind of a personal confidence in that ability. So mine was definitely something geared towards what I'm good at.
Love that. I also love chopsticks. My 2-year-old loves chopsticks. Okay, now let's hear from a tweezers group. We had 2 very large tweezers and spoon group.
So
I'll go.
because sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. I said because it says a pair of chopsticks, like if you had 2 pair, maybe that'd be more functional. But even as an expert with 1 pair of chopsticks, you essentially have a pair of tweezers. So people in our group like the option of an extra tool with the spoon that you could use to like hold and brace things at the same time. But that's for the attempt at tying them. I kind of like how Joe brought up that maybe you could use them to make it functional without tying them.
I think great arguments. I think Melanie maybe also came off mute. Do you want to add anything?
So our group said is that it would be an advantage because you would have 2 different types of tools. People are probably more comfortable and have a higher skill set with tweezers and spoons. It allowed a little bit of variability, and it's also 2 tools that you probably have highly available to you. But we said the celebration would be is when you actually got your shoes tied, you could then use the spoon to eat ice cream.
I love that. And that's so relevant to my life right now because I promised my toddler that we'd get ice cream after school. I can't forget. So thank you all for sharing. These were very compelling arguments. So as you shared with each other in your group and just now whole group, there are some creative and compelling reasons that it's possible to get the job done with any of these tools, right? Even if it might be challenging or uncomfortable at first. You can figure out a way to use either chopsticks or tweezers and a spoon. Let's connect this to our learning for today. We face similar decisions like this all the time as leaders, right? We have lots of options for tools we can use, approaches we can take to improve teaching and learning. And we could probably get creative and make any of those tools or strategies work for us, right? But sometimes what matters more is not what tool you use, but rather the tool's alignment to your vision, the tool's purpose, and how you plan to put that tool to work. We're going to have conversations today digging into that idea. Not so much what is the tool we'll use, but how do we intend to use it? And does it give us the information that we need as instructional leaders and coaches?
Awesome. So with that, okay. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into talking a little bit more about this vision for strong instruction. I'm going to call on, let's see, who do I have? Melissa Wheelock. Can you go ahead and come off mute and read our quote on the screen, please?
Simply put, the more questions you ask, the more answers you'll receive and the more solutions you'll uncover. But it's important to be asking the questions that nobody else is asking. By simply asking a different question, you can open up the possibility of having dozens of different answers and ways to solve a problem.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So with that, we're actually going to kick off this segment with an exercise called the question formulation technique, or the QFT. So actually last time we did this exercise in person, we actually had a couple folks in the audience who had done it before and were familiar with it, which was awesome. But this exercise is definitely near and dear to my heart because I actually interned with the group that developed this exercise when I was in university back in Boston. So I'm really excited for us to do this. So there is a little bit of setup needed in order to maximize it in a virtual setting. And so with that, we'll jump into some of that setup together. So first and foremost, the purpose of this exercise is to stretch the way we think about a very, very normal part of our roles, right? Oftentimes we take things like coaching, supporting teachers, etc., for granted. We start to just do it on autopilot. And so this is kind of designed to help us slow down and really pick that apart and think a little bit differently about how we engage in that work. So for this exercise, you will be in breakout rooms and you'll receive a statement. Of course, if you're in a group with multiple people already, like say you have like several people from your school team or school site, you can do this as a group. The goal, though, is for your group to craft as many questions as you can in the time provided in response to a prompt that you'll get on the slide. A person will be a scribe. They'll record all the questions down. We have a slide deck set up for you guys to be able to record those. And then there are 5 simple rules. The first rule is ask as many questions as you can in a specific time frame. You'll have about 2 minutes. Don't stop to edit or fix any questions. Just from experience, this step right here, this direction is typically the hardest one, especially for professionals to follow. So I want you to hear that and be like, we're not going to succumb to that. So don't stop to edit, fix, or answer any questions. Write down questions exactly as they were asked, even if they're a little bit wonky or funky. Don't stop to answer them. And there's no such thing as a silly, wrong, or obvious question. So actually, Namisha and I are just going to model that process for you really quick. So say, for example, we got a prompt, and the prompt is learning acceleration is an important strategy for supporting students with gaps in their learning. We're going to set a timer, and now we're going to do the exercise. I'm going to be scribe. Okay, so let's start and model, Namisha.
What kind of gaps?
What is learning acceleration?
When we say supporting, what does that mean?
Does learning acceleration work for all content areas?
Do we need to purchase anything for learning acceleration?
Why is it an important strategy? Okay, we'll pause. I know. So now we're getting on a roll. So see how we didn't stop and answer like, oh, well, what do you mean by that? Or actually, I heard from the research, right? We're not doing any of that. We're just generating a bunch of questions in response to a prompt. And that's what you're going to be doing in your breakout rooms to a prompt. So with that, actually, to simplify this process a little bit, we're going to do 2 things. So we'll send you to breakout rooms. When you're typing your questions, please type them on the slide that corresponds to the breakout room that you are in. So if you're in breakout room 1, you're going to be recording your questions on the slide that says breakout room 1. And again, to simplify this, I just put the prompt at the top of everyone's slide. So as soon as you are in the slide deck and in your breakout rooms, you'll see the prompt and we'll broadcast to you, hey, you got 2 minutes, so you better be typing out those questions so that you can get the questions flowing. Before you head to breakout rooms, are there any questions before we begin any exercise? Okay, with that, let's go ahead and get our breakout rooms going.
Hi, ladies. So I think I was in the wrong room because I'm ESU 13 and everyone in my room were the same ESU and the same people. So was I supposed to be with?
Nope,
No.
that was pure chance.
It was.
Yeah.
They were all Fremont people and their ESU.
Well, the Fremont thing is they're all in the same room, so they've asked for sound purposes to be grouped together even in our random breakouts today because they're joint. So that part isn't chance, but the rest of the you guys being ESU 13 is chance. So yeah.
So was there more than, there were like 3 people that had Fremont on their?
Yeah, all 3 of those
Oh.
people are sitting in the same room. So if I put them in random breakouts with different people, the sound is going to be too
Oh.
confusing. That's why.
Well, then I messed up.
It's okay. It's all right.
Awesome. And welcome back, everyone. Before we jump into the next slide, just take a second, 30 or so, to just scan some of the awesome questions that were generated on a few of these different slides. Yeah, I'm seeing awesome things like, who are the coaches? Do teachers sign up for coaching? What do you do with the tool after you are done gathering information? Is the tool digital? By everyone, do we mean everyone? Wow, these are some really awesome questions. Is it only teachers? And just to call back that quote that we started off to, just by simply asking different questions, you can open up the possibility of having tons of different answers and done tons of different ways to solve a problem. Yes, we can go ahead to the next slide. Awesome. So, these are all, though, the very types of questions that every school leader, regardless of the tool that you're using, you should be asking yourselves when thinking about the most effective resources needed to achieve a vision for strong instruction. We've heard even just a lot of questions around, what is the vision? How are you defining it? Who contributed to that vision? Several tools ultimately, theoretically, could still lead to improvements in student outcomes, because that's ultimately why we're all here, right? Thinking about how to improve student level outcomes. But just like our icebreaker, just because you can use a tool doesn't mean you should, right? Just because you can use a spoon to tie your shoelaces doesn't mean that that's the most effective way to tie your shoelaces. Or you can use chopsticks doesn't mean that those are the most effective tool. So we are thinking really discernibly, right? Is this tool aligned to what our vision for strong instruction is? Why are we using this tool? And how will we use it in service of the ultimate outcomes for kiddos? So just wanted to make sure we name that up front, because there's always a talk on, well, what tools should we use? And we want to take a step back and think, is it really about the tool, or is it about this process of generating, how do we make that decision that's aligned, purposeful, and has a clear set of outcomes? So with that, we're actually going to spend some time bringing in your pre-work. So before we dig into why specifically during this series, we are orienting our development around the TNCP core rubric specifically. First, we wanted to let you all have some time in breakout conversations discussing your pre-work. So during this time, there are three main questions. What is the vision for strong instruction based on the descriptors in the tool? What do you notice? What's inspiring about the information in this tool specifically? And where do you already see strengths in what you're using? And where do you see potentially growth areas in what you're using? So again, this is based on the pre-work that you all got prior. So we'll spend about, 5 to 7 minutes in breakout rooms chatting about this. Welcome back. We hope you had great discussions. And even if you found yourself being like, oh, snap, missed some of the pre-work, I hope that, as you were reading it, you started to acclimate or get used to navigating the tool, because we'll be using it a lot today. So word on the street is that a certain Kelly Clapp had some pretty awesome things to say in their breakout room. So I'd love you to come off mute and share some of your reflections with the larger group.
Feel like it wasn't just necessarily me talking in our group, but I think there were some really nice things that were said, and of course in varying roles. And just think about my experience in an ESU serving 34 school districts. I think we have folks across the spectrum in terms of implementation and that vision for instruction. And I think the school districts that we see that are doing fairly well are the ones that have that strong instructional vision and common language, whereas the schools that we work with that we see struggling are the ones that might be missing those elements.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share what clearly I was the one who was spying on you and told Nadia to call on you, but can you share what you shared about the language of the tool and the piece around not being non-judgmental?
You can tell that the tool is definitely geared toward student actions and behaviors, which I think that's super critical when you're trying to build a relationship with a teacher and visiting their classroom. It's a very personal to them. And I think that we can come at it from a non-judgmental stance is super important.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Other ideas, are there other things that folks notice? What stands out to you about the tool, the core teaching rubric?
What we were trying to do, we're a group of 4 from LPS. And so we were looking at it from a lens of how does this compare to the Danielson framework, because that's what we use for appraisals, and felt like it's much more explicit in some ways than the framework that we use especially when it comes to instruction and talking through frequency of what we should be observing.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. One more response.
I just think the layout and the length of it, it's not overwhelming, and I don't think will create a lot of anxiety for either the observer or the teacher. And it's just really focused on what matters, and there's not a lot of extra fluff in it. So I think that is really helpful.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for sharing your reflections, whole group. That really sets us up for the day. And so what we'll do right now is spend a little bit more time just like talking in broad strokes about the tool, and then a little bit about why it's designed in this exact way. Because we will be using it and orienting towards that language, just because, you know, having common language is important for development. Are we saying that you have to throw out whatever you're using and adopt this? Absolutely not. But it makes our development as a cohort a little easier, and we can orient towards a similar orient towards a similar thing, because what we're really learning and thinking about and reflecting on is the process, right? And that process can be applied, you know, depending on a particular tool that you're using. And of course, if you're like, oh, well, we actually are rethinking what tools we use to coach versus evaluate, then of course, like, you know, that's a natural part of the process. But, you know, we did want to start by just grounding in some of this language. So with that, let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about the domains. Yes. Oh my gosh, Heather, we definitely will talk about that. Give me 1 second. So first, as you know, there are 4 domains. So essentially in a classroom with strong instruction, these 4 domains are meant to really get at this vision. So when you think about culture of learning, students are completing those instructional tasks, they're volunteering responses, and they're following behavioral expectations in that space, right? So we're really thinking about a pace that keeps kids engaged, while also being a safe place for learning, right? Because culture isn't just about compliance. You have a strong culture so that kids can learn rigorous material. And that brings us actually directly into essential content. So that's where we're really reflecting and thinking about, is what students are engaging in during a lesson aligned to grade level standards? Are they meeting the appropriate bar for rigor? Is it appropriate for the time of year and the course that students are engaging in? So really attending to what is happening over the course of a lesson, whether it's those activities, questions, and materials, and is it aligned to a grade level bar? Next, we have student ownership. Now, this one tends to be like, you know, warrant a lot of conversation. We hear folks use language like, are students engaged? Are they interested? And so what this domain is really designed to help us do is get very specific about what we are talking about. We're talking about student engagement. And instead of just using a word like engagement, because sometimes that can be conflated with interest, right? Oh, I like it. I think it's cool. I'm curious. We're really thinking about our students owning the learning, right? Our students responsible for doing the cognitive lift of that lesson, and the teacher really rarely jumping in to swoop in and rescue students to take off that cognitive load. So when we think about student ownership, really putting that cognitive load back on the kiddo. And finally, we're thinking about demonstration of learning. So, you know, there's so many moments where you get to the end of a lesson on an exit ticket and you're like, oh man, kids didn't do well on the exit ticket, or kids didn't do well on the assessment. And that to us is a missed opportunity, because in classes with strong instruction, there are actually multiple touch points over the course of a lesson, whether informal or formal, that helps us understand, are students making meaningful progress towards that learning outcome? Are they actually progressing towards that learning goal for the lesson? So we're thinking about, do students have multiple opportunities to demonstrate their learning over the course of a lesson and track what it is that they're gaining from the content?
Before we go to the next slide, Nadia, do you want to speak to Heather's question in the chat, or is that coming later?
Actually, it's on the next slide, so that's okay. So, specifically, we do at TNCP really ground ourselves in the idea that the ultimate purpose of instructional coaching is to have an impact on student learning and engagement. And so therefore, the vision of this tool is shifted away from teachers and on to student learning for that purpose. So the tool is designed to be neutral of the teacher and instead really focus on what are students experiencing over the course of a lesson. It's also designed to be non-evaluative. So when you think about an evaluation tool, the reason why they tend to be teacher-centered is because, evaluation tool is thinking about, well, are you meeting the professional expectations of your role, right? Are you doing what you are meant to do, whether it's in terms of lesson planning, making sure, you're maintaining a high bar for students, are you writing lessons that are engaging? But again, it's like focused on you, right? Are you doing the aspects of your role as a teacher? This is designed for coaching, right? Which is why you see a progression, the not yet to yes progression, because it helps you move teachers or a lesson, right, throughout like towards that rigorous bar for instruction. So whereas something that you're using for evaluation, it's more like, is it happening? Is it in place? Are you meeting the expectation or the norm? This is more about getting as close to a vision as possible. And visions are meant to be aspirational. They're meant to be inspirational, and they're meant to actually think about, well, if these things are in place, what kind of excellence are we actually seeing in a student level outcome? So let me pause right there, and Heather and Katie, do those add clarifications, or are there still more questions?
No, thank you.
Awesome. And then finally, yes, the idea, so Tessa, you mentioned this in terms of it being its simplicity. Yeah, there are 4 domains, right? There are a bajillion things that we can be looking at or monitoring over the course of a lesson. But at the end of the day, we really do feel like these 4 big buckets are the things that drive student impact and student learning. So let's narrow it down, let's get really strategic, and let's hone in on those and being excellent in those in service of strong instruction. Okay, so we have 4 key takeaways. First, the tool is used to coach and is aligned to a vision for strong instruction. It's not meant to be evaluative. We actually strongly advise districts against adopting this as a formal evaluation tool because it's designed to help lessons get towards a vision for strong instruction. 2, the tool is designed to help you move instruction along a continuum. So that way it's on any given lesson. Yeah, Monday's lesson was awesome. Wednesday's lesson needed a little bit more work. Friday's lesson was awesome. These are meant to be snapshots and moments in time. They're not supposed to be reflections on a teacher, right? Which is another reason why the language is not teacher-centered, it's student-centered, because it helps us think, well, what was the impact of the instructional decisions made during one lesson or during one portion of a lesson? Next, time is taken to ensure that all stakeholders are appropriately invested in its use and its purpose. So whether it's this one or another one, this step can't be missed, right? We have to understand that folks need to be gradually invested in whatever process we're using for coaching towards a vision for strong instruction. And finally, whatever tool is being used, it's really imperative to reflect on, is a student level impact really clear, right? Is it obvious how this tool is meant to help push and have an impact on kids? Again, that's some of the downsides of tools that are very teacher language centered, because oftentimes we aren't thinking about, okay, well, how does this translate to student level outcomes, to results, to the student lived experience over the course of a lesson? So whenever we're thinking about moving instruction, how do we make sure that the student level impact of coaching support is made really, really clear in whatever it is that we're using? All right, so with that, I am so excited to actually pass the mic over to someone else on this call from the field. So Lucas McCain is a principal over at Maywood Public Schools, and has essentially gotten a little bit of a head start on some of this process that we're starting together as a cohort. So we've been working with Maywood Public Schools over the last couple months to think a lot about a vision for strong instruction, and we recognize the ways in which that can be a challenging experience. And so instead of hearing from us about that process, we decided to let you all hear from another colleague, another principal directly who is going through this mindset shift right now. So I'll go ahead, pass things over to Lucas, and thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, so Nadia asked me to answer these two questions. And so the first one was how using this tool shifted how I define strong instruction. And so for me, it was shifting what I was looking at while observing. When I'm using my evaluation tool, a lot of my time is spent looking at teacher moves and choices. And when I'm using the rubric, we were focusing on student ownership a lot of the time. And so when you're looking at that one, you are focused on student actions. And you're thinking about, what are the students thinking? Are they the ones giving the evidence of their thinking? Do the students, are they defending any of their answers in any way? And then are they responding to each other? And then the last bucket in that one too is like, are they trying? And so what we have noticed doing this, we also hired a staff developer, and so she's been doing this with us too. And so what when we notice this is that teachers do a lot of the work for our kids right now. And so we're going to have to use this rubric to help us change those teacher habits. And we're hoping that coaching can do that. And so the rubric also forces you to be honest about time. How much time of that 15-20 minutes that you were in that classroom for that snapshot were the students doing the work, or how much of the time were the teachers doing the work? And so, you're counting the kids and looking things that way. And so, how much student voice was present, how much teacher voice was present. And then thinking of that from that engagement standpoint. The other one that we really focused on, the other rubric that we looked at a lot, was the essential content one. And kind of our big takeaway from that one is, because we've been in CSI for as long as we have the high quality materials in place. But that doesn't necessarily lead to strong instruction. And so it's also challenged my brain on too, like knowing, is this an activity that is appropriate for second grade? And so then I have to make note of what it is, and then go back and look at the second grade standards and say, okay, good, that is a second grade standard, or I wonder why we chose to do that activity. What's it building to? Is it something that I need to monitor more moving forward? And so really what it's done for us is it's making our view of strong instruction more from a student perspective, and what they're doing and thinking, versus a teacher perspective. And then the second question that they wanted us to talk about was how our perception of instructional coaching shifted in the past few months. And so what the rubric has done for us is it's just given us a tool to use while doing observations. And it allows us to be less subjective and more focused on student actions. And like I said, this is a new position for us. And so coaching in general in this area is a foreign idea. And so for all of us, it's going to be a learning curve for all of us. But our goal is to eventually launch this with every single teacher, just because I feel like everybody can always grow.
Thank you so much for sharing. We actually have a little bit of time for questions if folks did have questions to ask Lucas, or other things that they wanted to, learn more about. Thank you so much for sharing.
Ask a question.
How do you provide the feedback to your teachers from your walkthroughs using this rubric?
I'll be honest, it's something we're still working on. So far we haven't shared a lot of it because we're trying to kind of norm ourselves first. And so what we kind of started doing a little bit is just like leaving sticky notes of like, hey, I liked this or didn't like this. I had one teacher ask me because they knew a little bit more that we were using the rubric of like how they did. And I just told them, I go for those 15 minutes, not very good. But I said at the same time, I'm going to be coming back. So we haven't necessarily, shared a lot with the teachers yet. We've more shared like the vision of, hey, this is the tool. This is what we're going to be using. This is why we're popping in. These are the things we're looking for. But we have not probably made it quite to the feedback and the heavy conversations that are going to have to occur yet.
And can I name something too? You know, when you're thinking about any kind of shift, like we are very gradual. Like, we do understand that sometimes you can try and adopt a whole process all at once. We got a tool, we have coaching cycles, we have debrief conversations, we have a schedule. And at the end of the day, though, like, how can I really sit down and meaningfully have a coaching conversation with you when I'm still norming on my vision for strong instruction, right? Like before, my eyes weren't even trained to look at the student level lift and the cognitive load over the course of a lesson, right? Because I've been using different tools over the course of my career, I have not been looking at students. I've been looking at the teacher. So now I have to train and reorient myself as an observer to what I'm doing in that space. So we actually do really want to celebrate. And I will say, both Lucas and Cindy have really great relationships with their staff. Like, you guys are like this over there at Maywood. So there's a lot of that rapport already. But what's cool is that I think that you both have been very, very patient in the process to be like, hey guys, like we're not going to sit down and do a whole ton of like coaching with you right now because we are still learning. And that's okay, because we want to make sure that when it is time to sit down and like do this coaching with you and really think about how to move the instructional needle, we have more language and we can really do that and do that effectively. So it's okay. Like you go slow to go fast, right? And we want to celebrate that is 100. Yeah, see, yeah, Heather, exactly, right? Should be going slow to go fast later, 100%. Is really want to celebrate that at Maywood, because it can be easy to be like, oh my gosh, we have all this data, now what? But it's like, let's slow it down a little bit. Let's think about our messaging. Let's think about, our vision. Let's think about using it. Is it easy to use it? Is it clunky? So just wanted to like darken the lines around that and say, awesome question. And thank you for that response. Yes.
I also just want to highlight the way Lucas shared, John, when you asked like how do you give feedback? Lucas, you shared what teacher who asked for feedback. The way, I just want to like, in case you missed it, because he said it so quickly, but the way Lucas just said, in that 15 minutes, it wasn't great, but I'll be back. That didn't feel judgmental to me. That didn't feel like a ding to me. It didn't feel like, oh no, I'm in trouble if I'm the teacher. Like it just felt very matter of fact, but also really supportive. So I just wanted to highlight that as well. Like our teachers deserve feedback and development. And it's okay to give it, and you can give it in a way that still allows them to feel safe. So thank you for sharing that, Lucas.
It's actually what we really noticed though, is like, depending on the certain 15-20 minutes we were in the room, sometimes that student ownership bucket gets filled easily just by whatever set activity I'm watching. But if I happen to stop in for like a direct instruction piece where it's teacher heavy, then it's like, well, yeah, that's all ones because of the fact that you're doing a direct instruction piece right now. So it's never like one of those things like, oh man, she really failed today. It's like, okay, I need to make note of, okay, this is more of a direct instruction block. Maybe next time I come in, I'm going to try to come in 30 minutes later. maybe they'll be at a point where they're doing some more student collaboration. And so that's really what we've been trying to do, is like fine tune like our times of when we're trying to pop in. And Cindy's way better at getting to those than I am. But that's kind of where we're at right now, is just trying to fine tune our schedule of when can we see the student ownership taking place.
Any last questions?
I have a question. Lucas, thanks for sharing that. Thanks for being vulnerable with us too, but I wanted to know if this has also driven your professional development with your staff, or maybe where they're looking at their HQIM and saying, here's an opportunity in the materials where you can do student ownership, but you didn't do this. So what does training look like, and has there been any training?
But yeah, it's definitely kind of like highlighted some stuff that we need to do with our high school staff. And so we have done some strategies from the Teach Like a Champion book that are kind of focused on that participation piece. And so I just did a follow-up one here in September and I kind of did like a mini quiz of like, hey, what did we talk about in August? Because I didn't want to start the year. It was in one ear, out the other. So that tells me, like on my next one, I just need to review. And I also think I'm going to try to build in like role playing. And so, okay, so here are our strategies. You're going to pick some, and then you're going to role play. And so, because they have the information, and that's kind of what we've talked a lot about too, is like, how do you make the PD that you give habit changing? And so like, because of the fact that we've been CSI and we also had a different grant, we've brought in really, really good speakers in the 6 years that I've been at Maywood, but none of it's ever been habit changing. And so we just feel like the coaching of having somebody constantly come in and give feedback, and then pairing that with, I think what we're going to do, like I said, with role playing, is hopefully going to change those habits when they go back to their silos.
And Kristen, I'll say, like, just to toot a little bit more of Lucas's horn, Lucas and Cindy, actually, like, it'll be great. They'll sit down and say, okay, here are some strategies that we want to think about. Okay, but which strategies specifically do we think will move this indicator? Because we're seeing this indicator is not doing so great, right? Okay, sweet. Well, let's say means of participation is what is going to be our focus. All right, so now which one specifically do we want to see more of? Okay, great. Now let's do a quick pop in and see, are we seeing more of that in process or in progress? And it's just like trying little things to see what moves. And right now, what's cool is I'm starting to see so much intentionality and focus, right? Whereas, when we first started to work together, it wasn't like whack-a-mole, but it'd be like, okay, we're gonna do this. Okay, we're gonna do this. We're gonna do that. And it was like, okay, look, hold on, what is it driving towards? And now I feel like every time I talk to you or Cindy, we've noticed this trend. We've identified these two core teacher skills that we want to really hone in on. And we think this Teach Like a Champion strategy will drive us towards that. And I'm like, wow, with that kind of tight planning and constant flow, it's impossible to not see impact on student level, because now you're so focused on what student level change we want to see. Okay, now what do we need to put in place to make sure that is happening? How do we help people think about what activities from their HQIM? You know what, we really might not need this roots affixes worksheet from the HQIM. Let's deprioritize that so that we can get to this text dependent question, right? So like even thinking about, because like he said, just because you have the curriculum doesn't automatically mean essential content is going to be yeses all the way down, because teachers at any given point are making decisions with their HQIM that is potentially lowering the ownership or choosing an activity that doesn't really drive to the main objective or standard of that lesson. Because curriculum is designed to give you the kitchen sink. Here's any number of things you can use. make choices along the way. And we still have to make those choices instructionally. And so now we have language to say, all right, what trends are we noticing? How can we make better strategic choices with the curriculum to make sure we're maintaining that ownership and driving alignment towards the standard for that lesson? So can we just get like a round of applause for Lucas? You can either clap in the screen. Yes, thank you. You can use your Zoom reactions. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you for your questions. Hopefully this has been very valuable to hear from another colleague, especially another fellow CSI school who's really dedicated to moving the needle for student learning. So thank you. Okay. 10-minute break. See you all soon.
All right, welcome back. So before the break, a good 10 minutes ago, we started to explore that TNTP core rubric as a vision for strong instruction. And now we're going to jump into practice. We're going to use it to observe a few clips of instruction. But before we do that, before we get into these 3 different classrooms, let's first take a little tour of the tool and talk about how to use it during an observation. So as I'm sure you've already noticed, each of the 4 domains that Nadia summarized earlier has its own page. And at the top of each page, you'll notice the domain written in all capitals with an essential question that helps you ground in the big picture of what to observe for that domain. I personally find the essential question really helpful, especially if I find myself getting really in the weeds of the language of some of the indicators and I'm kind of like waffling between ratings. Sometimes it helps to just take a step back and just ask myself that big picture question. Overall, are all students responsible for doing the thinking in this classroom? And that big picture step back question can kind of help you reground if you get too lost in the details at times. So that essential question is listed up there at the top. You're also going to see the different columns that indicate the different ratings or levels of effectiveness. So the descriptors you see on this tool are not yet, somewhat, mostly, yes, and then a final column that's yes and. Each of these refers to the extent to which you observe students engaging with each indicator. We've talked a lot about how this tool focuses on the student experience. So that's exactly what these percentages are measuring. So these percentages you see here for each of the descriptors means that one of the first things you do when you enter a classroom is to count the number of students. Whenever we at TNTP go into any classroom, the first thing I'm doing is counting and then writing that down. So I know, oh, there's 15 students total. If you don't know how many students are in the classroom, you can't really knowingly answer if some, most, or all students did this, that, or the other, right? You can't confidently rate, oh, most students answered questions if I don't know that, yeah, actually 12 out of 15 students answered all of the questions. So those numbers help you be a little more confident in figuring out where would I rate this snapshot of a lesson. And then we get into the real core of the tool, which is the indicators themselves. The focus of each indicator in this tool is represented by the bold font in the first column. On this slide, those are underlined in pink. The lesson is rated by each indicator, and then at the end, you'd combine the ratings together to generate an overall rating for each domain. So on this example for student ownership, I would rate this first indicator around cognitive work. I would rate the second indicator around students providing evidence, etc. And then let's say I landed on mostly, somewhat, mostly, yes. On average, that would land me at a mostly for the student ownership domain. A final note on the use of percentages here. Some of us might love numbers and feel really excited that we're putting numbers to an observation like this. But I'm guessing that there are at least a few folks on this call who may feel a little bit uncomfortable putting hard numbers on an observation when we know that teaching is, of course, like a very personal craft for teachers. I just want to name that we really focus in on the data portion of observations because that pushes us in pursuit of actual equity. Equity in education is ultimately defined as every student getting what they uniquely need in our schools, regardless of where they come from, right? Regardless of what they look like, who their parents are, where they grew up, what language they speak at home, what they showed up knowing or not knowing, right? And the benefit of using a tool like this is that it helps us focus on a moment in time and on the student experience. So on a given day, in a given lesson, what is the actual number of students impacted by the teacher's instructional decisions? That focus gets us closer and closer to our goal of reaching every student, which is equity. So if you are that person who is nervous about if like putting numbers, number of students, like if counting that makes you a little nervous, I would think about it through the lens of equity. It's important to think about how many of our students are actually getting what they need from the lesson that we're observing. I'm going to pause here for a second before we get into our first video. Are there any questions about the tool, how it's organized, how to use it before we practice using it? Okay, let's practice. So this first clip that we're going to watch is from an 8th grade math classroom in Florida. The objective.
Since I wasn't added.
You weren't. Okay. The objective for this lesson is the student will learn to perform operations on calculating the rate using the simple interest rate formula. I want you to take a moment to read over the aligned math standard that's on the top of this slide. It is also in your participant handout. This is a Florida standard, and we didn't look up aligned to Nebraska standards because this teacher planned her lesson using Florida standards. So it would be unfair if we changed up the standards on her, right? So take a second to read through the standard. As you watch the video, capture notes in your handout on what you're observing for each of the 4 domains. And consider which of the domains are strengths in this lesson and which are areas of growth. And remember again that our goal is to consider just this 6.5-minute snapshot that we're watching as a moment in time. So try not to stray too far into what if land, right? If you start catching yourself thinking, well, what if the teacher did XYZ after this 6 minutes? What if the teacher said ABC beforehand? I don't know. All great questions, but right now we're just focusing on this 6.5-minute, that piece that we're observing. Are there any questions? We'll have a quick Zoom poll right after the video, asking you to identify what you thought were the strengths and growth areas. So be prepared to share that.
Read the question. Joe borrowed $3,200 to be repaid after 5 years at an annual simple interest rate of 7%. How much interest will be due after 5 years? Sean, what are they asking? What are they asking us here?
How much interest will be after 5 years?
So what exactly?
The interest.
Very good. The interest. And Francois, what's the formula to find the interest?
I equals P.
Very good. I equals P R T. Giselle, what does I stand for? The interest. P R T. And Ashley, what's the operation here? I equals multiplication. Very good. So I want to find the value for my principal. for my rate and for my time to get my interest. Wilfredo, what is your principal? What's the amount for your principal?
$3,200.
Very good. This right here, that's my principal. That's the money that I borrowed. $3,200. Next, Angela, what is my rate? 7%. I want to convert my percent into a. Yes. Very good. And what's 7% as a decimal? 0.07. 0.07. And Roberto, what's another way of saying 0.07? Very good, 700s. Next, Suhaili, what is my time? 5. Very. What did you say? 5 years. Very good. This is my time. Time always has to be in what? In months and days? Years. Very good, in years. So Karina, let's say that they tell you 5 months, what would you do? Because there's 12 months in a year. Very good. So when I multiply 3,200, 700 times 5, Esmeralda, what do you get? No, it's fine. Take a minute. 1,420? Oh, okay. 1,120. I'm going to take it a step further, and I'm going to ask you something else that isn't being asked here. How much does Joe have to pay back in total, Mr. Gutierrez? That's my principal. That's how much he borrowed. But how much would Joe have to pay back in total? 4,300. Give him some time. 4,300. Did you get that number? You added the principal plus the interest. Very good. You added the principal plus not the rate, the interest. The interest, because the interest is basically a fee for borrowing that money, okay? And it's determined by the rate that they give you. Let's check for understanding through cold calling. Damaris, what was the question that they were asking us for?
How much interest will be due after 5 years?
And Damaris, what formula did we use to find the interest?
I equals PRT.
And Ms. Coleman, what does I stand for?
Interest.
P?
Principal.
R?
Rate.
T?
Time.
What's the operation, Ms. Coleman?
I equals P.
No, that's the formula. What's the operation? Are we multiplying? Very good. We're multiplying. And next, Roberto, how much was the principal? What's your rate, Roberto? 7%. And what's your time? When we multiply all that, we end up with 1,120. Next, the total amount that Joe had to basically pay back for this loan. How much was it, Wilfredo?
So $4,320.
Because we added the what?
The principal and the interest.
Very good. Let's take some notes. We have 5 weeks before FCAT. 5 weeks. That's all we have left. So it's important. Every day counts. Let's go over what we did yesterday. Review it. Yesterday we did simple what? Simple interest rate. Very good. And quickly, since we did this yesterday, it seems like you know us very well. Selena, what was the formula that we used to find simple interest rate? Very good. Intro 1I is what's again? What's I? Very good. Intro 1, what's P? What's R? Very good. And what's T? And time always has to be in what? Very good. They give it to you in months. We've talked about it on the warm-up. The time has to go over, say they give you 7 months, you'll put it over. Very good. Now, let's talk about real world application. How you would apply this in the real world. Okay. Who can give me an example of how you apply this in the real world? Yes, go ahead.
By using loans.
Very good. Loans. Can you clarify on that?
Like a car loan. Like if I want to buy a car.
Very good. A car loan, we can talk about cars. One day you want to buy a house. One day you want to own your own business. Whatever so be it. Loans. car loans. Okay, so let's talk about how that will work in a bank with I equals P R T. What would P be in a car loan? The money that what?
That we borrow from a bank.
The money that we borrow from a bank. Very good. What would R be? No, the rate. The rate. Right. And the rate is basically the fee. Okay? The fee for what you have to pay back for borrowing that money. And what would T be?
The time.
The time. The time that the bank will give you to pay back that what?
The loan.
The loan.
All right, before we talk about this as a group, Abby's gonna open up a quick poll just to gauge everyone's immediate reactions on strengths and growth areas. All right, let's hear from some folks. I'd love to hear from somebody who identified essential content as a strength. If you selected essential content as a strength, I'd love to hear your rationale for that. And I want to encourage all of us to anchor our responses in specific evidence. Use the language of the tool if it's helpful, but also identify specific evidence to support your conclusions.
I put that essential content was an area of strength because she stayed on topic the whole time. She was using real world problems. She was bringing that in. I love that she reviewed content from the day before. So they are maintaining that. And then I also loved how throughout the whole time, she was really ensuring that students were understanding what things stood for within it. Like, okay, what does this letter stand for? What does this stand for? So I thought she did a really good job staying on topic, on task with that.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to add to that or share why they picked either essential content or cultural learning as a strength? I want to hear from one person on culture of learning. What did you notice as a strength related to culture of learning?
I didn't choose that, but I would say one of the strengths was all the students were engaged and she was calling on all the students, and then she kept the pace, like the instructional pace, she kept them engaged.
Yeah, pace was good. There's clearly an expectation that my teacher might call on me at any time, so I got to be like ready to share. And she called on a ton of different students throughout the time, and they all, like, no one just sat there in silence or said like, I don't know. They all were like ready with an answer. Yeah.
Well,
Let's go ahead.
She also named, okay, we're going to do the cold calling, like, you know, that's been already embedded into the practice. So the students knew what was going to be expected, that they could just get called on at random at any time.
Thank you for that. Let's talk about growth areas. Would love to hear from a couple of people if you picked either student ownership or demonstration of learning. Why did you identify those as growth areas?
But student ownership, like maybe having some more turn-in talks, defend your answer. Why did you say that answer over a different answer?
Love it. I was trying to keep track of the question she was asking, and I think she only asked, how did you know, once, that I caught. Yeah. Let's hear from at least one other person on growth areas.
Did she check any student work? Like I saw her work the room a little bit, but I don't know that she was looking at student, like their calculations. They were calling out, but I don't know that I saw her like go look at a student's work. But.
Yeah, what's the impact of that? I love that you called that out. What's the impact of that?
Well, I mean, they could have one of the answers right, but relying on what she's doing on the board for their own computation, like they're not getting that tangible rep with their own hands. You know what I mean? They're not making it work. They're just kind of watching, I think. And she's not, you can get one right and get it wrong on your own paper. And I don't know that she's using proximity to check, but
yeah,
but they shouldn't be wrong if they're following her, but I don't know. Just an observation.
Yeah, and what if she didn't call on a particular student at any point, right? Like, is that an opportunity for the kid to opt out? Like, do we know that there's a kid in the classroom who maybe doesn't get it? Yeah. All great comments. Any last thoughts before we move on to a second video?
And did she, sorry.
Go ahead, sorry.
Did she say it's 5 weeks until, I'm assuming it's their state testing? And I was with her with the real world stuff, but I don't know. She could have kept that one tucked away, maybe.
Yeah.
But you know what's interesting about that too? Like the fact that then that's like a hint or a clue that where we are at the time of the year, probably towards the end of the year. And the teacher stopped. I mean, yes, it was a multi-step real world problem, but the teacher stopped at every step. Students didn't really get an opportunity to perform multiple steps all the way through in service of a problem. And I thought that's like an interesting choice to make too when you think about rigor, especially at this point in the year. You know, like going back to central content, yes, like overall that might be a general strength, but if you think about even as some of those indicators, it's like, well, as an activity, like students really should have gotten a chance to do multiple steps on their own, you know, in order to demonstrate really, are they able to do that kind of exercise? So just wanted to, yes, that's a good thing that you picked up on. And it's also should be like, well, at this point in the year, I mean, they should be doing a little bit more on their own, you know what I mean? But anyway, that's me.
I'm glad you named that too, because this is, I think, a great example of where the teacher and even an observer might think, like on the surface, pretty good, right? She's calling on lots of teachers. She's asking lots of questions. She's getting a lot of right answers from students. So in her head, she might end this lesson thinking they've got it. Like they can name PRT easily. And then they're going to take the state assessment and be asked to do those multi-step problems, but they didn't actually get a chance to do that. So this might be a situation where the teacher's like, yes, my kids are getting it. And then the scores on the end of year test might not reflect that at all. Heather, you were going to say something.
I was just going to say that there was very little opportunity for students to show their own thinking. She was doing all the thinking and they were just providing her with the answers.
Exactly. Okay, we could keep talking about this, but let's jump to our next video. For this,
Read the question.
Nope, I don't want to watch that again. For our next video, we are headed back to elementary school. We're going into a 4th grade math classroom. The objective for this lesson is that kids will be able to independently solve comparison fraction problems and show their thought process. So take a minute to read over the Common Core math standard for this lesson. and then we'll start the video.
Six and 3/10 laps. Sebastian ran 5 9/10 laps. How many more laps did Brian run than Sebastian? Think about it in your head. Visualize the problem. Go ahead and share with a partner. What do you know?
What I know.
Brian, I think Brian ran, okay, so it says Brian ran 6 and 3/10 laps. Sebastian ran 5 and 9/10 laps. How many more laps did Brian run than Sebastian? So we know that Brian ran 6 and 3/10 laps and Sebastian ran 5 and 9/10 laps. So we're looking for how many more laps did Brian
Good conversation.
run than Sebastian.
Nice. So, can someone put it in your own words? What are we looking for? Again, I don't want you to, don't give me the answer, right? Don't say, oh, this is how I'm going to solve the problem. It's like, try to put this problem in your own words. Zuri.
My imagining is a little lap team, and then Brian is like running, and right now the total is 5 and 9/10. And then I can see Sebastian behind him, and I mean 6 and 2, and then Sebastian is behind him, and he has 5 and 9/10.
So you see Sebastian behind him? That's what you see? Delilah.
I could visualize that Brian is running around the duck pond, and that Brian started first running, and then what Susie said that Sebastian started running after him. That Brian ran 6 and 3/10 laps, and then Sebastian ran 5 and 9/10 laps.
Okay. All right. You get to choose your partner. No chocolate cake partner. Go. Find a spot, please, in 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, it's okay, 6. Chris, if you want, you can switch
So what I'm going to highlight is that we already highlighted Brian ran 6 and
Chris, I'm gonna show you. I'm gonna do 4.
maybe we could do these in the back for the challenge. For the challenge, probably maybe we could start with these and then go with these. So like yesterday with the warm-up and then like with the warm-up and then start with one of the hurdles. Okay. So let's do the one today. Yesterday we did 2. Yeah, so this one? Yeah. So let's do 4 boxes and we could do a 1 first and this. So let's start with Brian, which is 6 and 3/10 laps, and then with Sebastian. We should do like this one. Put the button because it's equal. What about this comes to 6? And then 5, and then we have 1, and then we're taking away 9, 10, 10 minus 9, 10. Yeah, so that's like from that one, we're gonna take away from that one, that's one minus 1. Yeah, so you're gonna have to break it up. You're gonna break it up into 10s, yeah. Okay. And what about let's do it in a fraction bar so it will be easier. So we'll do it in a fraction bar. We'll break it up to 10, and then 3 tenths. Yeah, we'll take away 3 tenths. On 9, and then right here we go. We have to take away 9 from 3 tenths. So we're gonna take away 9 tenths from the. So we go like this, minus 3 tenths, right? Or are we minusing the? I think 9 tenths because we're not minusing the 3 and 10. That's how many he has. So we're minusing the 9 tenths. From 3 tenths? Yeah. Well, we could because then it would be 6 tenths. Well, we're gonna be doing the 10s. We're gonna be doing the 10s, so we're gonna be taking 9 away. Because we have to take away 9 tenths, not 3 tenths. Okay, now. So right here, let's just do a fraction, but then the other one we explain it in a circle. You seriously don't know the algorithm? They're changing up. So what should we do for our double check? I think we should break up the numbers and then we double check by that. I have one but you're not matching so I think maybe the equation that we should use is maybe 6 and 3 tenths minus 5 and 9 tenths because we're trying to figure out how many more laps did Brian run than Sebastian.
So this is right here is going to be 6 and 1 tenth, 6 and 2 tenths, and 6 and 2 tenths. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 4 tenths. Oh. So the answer is 4 tenths.
How did you get that? 13 minus 9 tenths is 4 tenths, okay?
Yeah, you're right.
Good. And so now you have how many holes? You had 5 holes because you took one of those holes and made it what? Is there any way you could visually represent that right there?
That would be 1 and 4 tenths, right?
What did you do? You took one of them away and did what? What's that? You added what to the 3?
Yeah, if you go up,
what is a
it'll
hole?
be 6 tenths. I mean 4 tenths.
What would be a hole? What would be a hole right here? What's the hole that you added right here? 10 what? 10 tenths, okay? So you added 10 tenths to the 3 tenths to get to 13 tenths, and then the 13 tenths minus 1. Is there any way that you can check your work here? How would you check your work to see if that's the actual distance that Brian and Sebastian are apart?
Okay, let's do one more quick poll. All right, if you're still taking the poll, that's fine. Abby will share results in a little bit, but let's go ahead and open up the conversation. I'll just kind of leave it really open-ended this time. I'd love to hear from folks on what you noticed in this observation. And again, encourage you to use specific language from the rubric and evidence.
When looking at student ownership, we noticed that students are responding and building on one another's thoughts, thinking, and understanding of the concepts.
Thank you. What else? What else did we notice? Either strength or growth area, or just noticing. Maybe you're not sure if it's a strength or a growth area, but it's something you noticed.
I just loved how much the students had that opportunity to critically think and be able to explain and talk about how they were getting their answer. Like that's going to help them so far beyond just this lesson because it's developing skills well beyond. And I loved that you could tell these students were used to having those conversations. It wasn't pulling teeth. They were using the language. They were helping each other out. And so that just shows you like that culture of the classroom of like, that's just the expectations and that's just how it is. And that's what they do. And again, like that's going to carry them over so far beyond just this lesson or so far beyond just this standard.
What about a growth area? I'm seeing several poll responses for a growth area being essential content and demonstration of learning. I'm curious if anyone who picked either one of those would like to share.
Yeah, I know that I picked the essential content, and part of the thing is students, if you're just going to check in with one to see their learning, I thought maybe it'd be a little more beneficial to share that, just have the students share that with the class and have that discussion. I don't know how he was able to evaluate how everybody was doing, even though the students were having a good discussion. If he's just going and sitting down one by one, I don't know how everyone's learning from everybody, but I thought everything else was pretty solid. I just thought that was a pretty an area for growth.
That's a really great point. I'm actually really glad you named that because it brings up the point around in this few minutes we saw, we didn't see him walk around the room and like check in with every group, right? If you go into a classroom at a point where you don't observe that, you don't have to use this tool to rate the teacher not yet for those things. Like if you just didn't see that part of the lesson, then you just didn't observe it. That's it, right? But you're right in this case, like if we observe the whole lesson and he didn't check in with everybody, that might be, demonstration of learning might be an area of growth there. Nadia, I feel like you're gonna come off mute. Did you want to add anything? Oh, just trying to read your face. Okay, any other thoughts on this observation?
I was a little, the questions that came to my mind, I guess, are this might be a parochial school. They look like they have uniforms on, so there may or may not be a lot of diversity, which we really can't tell for sure. But generally speaking, in a fourth grade classroom with 22 students, with the diversity that you may have in most schools, I was a little concerned that all students got the same problem and the same setup without any kind of scaffolding differentiation type thing for our kids that might struggle a little versus our high ability kids that are going to be done with this in 2 minutes. That's what I was working on in my head.
That's a really interesting reflection. I have a response, but I want to open it up to the group to see if anyone else wants to respond before I say anything.
Well, one of the things that I was going to talk about, and maybe it lends to that a little bit, is I did feel like the culture of learning was pretty solid from the students, but I felt like, and maybe I've been mostly a secondary guy, but I felt like there was some things that he could have done within that, and maybe this was part of that scaffolding or part of those routines and procedures to maximize a little bit of that instructional time. So like where he's like, you guys can choose your partners. I kind of cringed a little bit when I saw some of the little girls kind of not knowing where to go. You ended up with a partner of 4 instead of group of 4 instead of 2. So could you have had, some strategies in place where you have those partners in place earlier, and then maybe you group some of those differentiated learning groups within that. And then which ones you can specifically go to and which ones are going to need additional help and which ones are going to get done quicker. Also, right away in the first one where they're doing their partner next to them, I don't know, again, based on the level of learning from the students, the group that she went and focused on, they hadn't even gotten through reading the problem before he was already bringing them back together for feedback. So I don't know if he, based his wait time off of other groups that were more ahead. And so I just think about those pieces when you think about the culture of learning. What could he have done a little bit better within those aspects to maximize that instructional time and to scaffold maybe that work a little bit more?
All great points. I do want to name that these were like clips from a video, like somewhat mashed together. So potentially, if we saw the full lesson in real time, they might have spent a lot more time on that. We just don't know. But I did want to touch quickly on the question we had from Walt Hill around kids being at different levels. I think that's something we just don't know from observing. We don't know these kids. We don't know their context. We don't know their community. We don't even know what state they're in. Like, there's a lot we don't know about these students. So we wouldn't want to make assumptions. But I also just want to name that you want to start with the grade level bar for all kids, which is what this teacher did, right? So all kids are working on that grade level problem, where he would then, if we observed longer, ideally we'd want to see him continuing to check in with more students and providing scaffolds as needed. But we ideally wouldn't want to see him give different levels of problems to different students. All kids should get the chance to try that grade level rigorous question. I'm going to pause there for a second. Any other thoughts related to that? Or Nadia or Abby, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I guess like the only thing I would add to is like, when it comes to these types of observations, I'm just going to lean in and understand that the teacher knows their kiddos and knows their students' individual needs and can make some of those decisions based on those relationships, right? And the same way any leader would in their respective schools, right? They would know, okay, this is a classroom that has this particular context. So therefore I am looking at unique sets of things in this space, et cetera. So, but this is like, this exercise for the purpose of learning how to navigate a tool such as this and language such as this for thinking about how do we, get proximity towards this vision for strong instruction. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would just add, so before coming to TNTP, my background is in special education and primarily co-teaching and inclusion settings, but also in resource settings. And I've done a lot of work with the core rubric across the US. And I think I've been in 32 states now observing instruction. So I've got a pretty good picture of what's happening in classrooms across the country. And by far more common is the problem that we are actually accommodating or scaffolding when we don't need to, as opposed to exposing kids to grade level work and just providing those just-in-time supports that allow them to access. So in addition to like the context of we don't know, it's always my push to say, like, more often than not, we're actually lowering the bar when we don't need to for students, as opposed to holding them to high expectations using like grade level essential content.
Thank you for sharing that context. We could go on and on about this. We have one more video, which I love a lot. Seen it many times, and I love to keep watching it. So for our last video, we're going into, probably for most of us, some unfamiliar territory, AP Physics in high school, everyone's favorite subject, I know. The essential question for this lesson, there's not an objective, there's just an essential question. It is, how does the temperature of a system relate to the internal energy of the system? So again, take a second to read over the aligned California Science Standard, and then we'll start the video and do a Zoom poll. Same process.
Go ahead. I just want to make sure that for ours, we have to, it gives us the angle of theta and then the R magnitude.
Yes.
We have to make a triangle on a plane. And our angle theta was 90 degrees. So I just wanted to make sure that, would that mean there was no X component?
What do you think?
Well, I know that for 45, when you have like an angle of 45, you start from the X-axis and then move up 45. So when you start, when it gives you 90, would you just move up all the way and have no X component?
Let's see, here's a 45-degree angle. So you're going to have an X component and a Y component because you're going to move to the right and then up to get to that point that has the 45-degree angle. Is that right?
Yes.
But your question is, what if the angle is not 45? What if it's 90 degrees? Now what do you do? Now what do you do? Do you move to the right? So the question is, will there be any X component?
Yes.
What is the X component here?
0.
All right, it's important. That's a good question. In your group right now, I would like the C person in each group to kind of summarize what we just said. What did we just say?
But there's a, like you see in the 90 the angle is 90 degrees, it's going straight up, right? So there's no components in the y direction, in the x direction. So, yeah, there would be no components. The components in the x direction.
All right, take a moment to make a note for yourself on the conclusion there. If there's a 90-degree angle, then there's no X component because you're not moving in the horizontal direction. That's important. That's important. Take a moment to make a note in your conclusion about that. Okay, as you wrap that up, I want to bring your attention to today's topic. Today's topic is temperature. Temperature. The first thing I want you to do in your group, the very first thing. Notice the first thing on your sheet is, what do I already know? We've already had an introductory lecture on this. In your group right now, I'd like you to spend just 30 seconds to a minute discussing what you already know about temperature. So in 30 seconds or a minute, I'm going to ask you to share, what do you know about temperature? So spend that time right now. What do you know about temperature?
Okay, average kinetic energy of No, it's the total Fahrenheit is equal to 9 total Celsius. Total Celsius plus 32. And that. And then no, so Celsius.
Okay, let's come back together. In your group over there, Christian, who's the B person?
Me.
Go ahead.
Well, we concluded that temperature is just a measurement of the amount of heat in an object, and heat is basically just the amount of energy it has.
Any response to that?
The amount of kinetic energy the molecules have.
Tell me more.
That the molecules are made up of atoms, and the atoms move inside the molecules, and that is what temperature is.
Tell me more.
That the more move that the molecules, the higher the temperature, and the lower the movement, the lower the temperature.
The lower the movement, the lower the temperature.
And the slower the atoms move.
The atoms will never stop moving. It'll just it'll decrease, but it can never stop moving.
What will decrease?
The the kinetic movement in the atoms.
The kinetic movement of the atoms? All right. I like this idea. Here's what I'd like you to do right now. Write down just briefly 1 or 2 sentences what you already know. What you already know or what you think you already know. Just write it down briefly. Doesn't have to be long. Maybe 1 or 2 sentences. 1 or 2 sentences. You can if you want. Equations are fine. All right. As you wrap it up in the next 10 to 20 seconds, finish writing what you're writing. Now here's what I'd like you to do. This part of the lesson is going to be observation. That means I want you to look at the demonstration. You can get out of your seats. At this time, I don't want you writing. I'm going to give you plenty of time to write about it, but first I want you to see it. I want you to come up here in a position where you can see the demonstration, so you can get out of your seat if you need to. And I have 2 beakers. I have 1 beaker right here with a thermometer in it that reads 80 degrees Celsius. And I have another beaker right here with a thermometer in it that reads 21 degrees Celsius. So just to be clear, I have one that reads 80 degrees C and one that reads 21 degrees C. So I'll call this T sub H, and I'll call this T sub C. Of course, T sub H stands for the hot, and T sub C stands for the cold. Both of these are water, and I would like you to observe what happens. I have some red dye. I'm going to drop it in there, and I want you to observe what's going to happen. I'm going to tell you what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to stir it. So just watch for a moment. As you're watching it, you can turn to the people in your group and just make observations. You can say anything you want. Just watch what happens.
Way faster.
Some sort of that one drops.
Oh, you know what? I get it. Because the atoms are moving so much, it's kind of stirring itself. It's like it's not stirring itself, but the atoms they're moving so much that it spreads it faster. Okay, than this one.
All right. All right. What do you notice happening here? What do you notice happening here? Go ahead.
The dye dispersed faster in the hotter water than it did in the cooler.
Okay. So what?
That's just the difference. The difference is that the hotter the molecules get, the faster that they move around in beakers. So if you put
which molecules?
The water molecules.
Can you see any molecules in there?
No, but you understand that because when you put the dye in, it shows how they're moving around the beaker.
What's he talking about, Melanie?
he's talking about that when you put another substance in like another liquid substance in a water, the atoms are moving faster. So in this case, when it's hotter, that they're going to diffuse faster because the atoms are moving faster than the atoms that are in the cold.
Can you see any atoms in there?
No.
Then why are you so sure that atoms are going on?
Because of atomic theory.
Tell me more.
Atomic theory says that everything's made up of matter and atoms in it.
Okay, I want to be kind of clear. That's correct. Here we're actually talking about molecules. Which molecules in particular?
Water and oxygen.
Water, hydrogen and oxygen atoms that come together to make water molecules. And we can't see those. We can't see them at all. If I look in there, it looks like liquid to me. If I try to see particles, I simply can't see them. But the dye helps us to infer something. And it's helping provide evidence for the model, the atomic model that you're talking about.
All right, we're gonna pause there, do one more quick poll. All right, let's go ahead and open it up. What did you notice about this lesson at this moment in time? And again, please use as much specific evidence as possible.
I thought he did a good job of expanding the learning beyond just the content itself. He kept asking, explain more. He deepened that understanding, not only basic understanding, but application. You know, it just like when he used the cold and hot water, he said, how do you know that? Can you see, you know, the atoms or the molecules, you know, and so he made them come to use inference, you know, and higher level of understanding of the content through application.
Thank you for sharing that. What else?
I know we have limited context of this lesson and where it's fitting in, but the standard says to develop and use models to illustrate energy. And I see that the teacher's doing that. And the students are demonstrating mostly through discussion and things, which is okay. Maybe then this will move into the development of the models. But he doesn't really give them feedback. He's like, okay, all right, tell us more about that, and just keep switching around. I don't know. It was kind of odd, different. I don't know. Effective, I'm uncertain, but
I mean, so actually I'm so happy you brought that up, Joe, but so this lesson in particular is written in a 5E format for those of you who didn't catch that. And that's actually an intentional structure to the lesson. You kind of don't give feedback or the answer at that stage of the lesson. That kind of gets stamped at a later point. It's like a particular type of instructional framework, but good noticing. I just wanted to mention that.
We talked about student ownership. You saw students writing, you saw them turning and talking. They were building off of each other's answers or helping each other when he was asking questions and they were struggling for words at times. So those were all strong in that format.
Yeah, I want to call out that what you just named also, part of that falls into demonstration of learning as well, right? Kids had a few different opportunities to respond. They had whole class questions. They got a chance to talk to partners and at their tables. They had a chance to independently write. They had a few different chances to show what they know. Any other thoughts, questions, sorry, go ahead.
What I would have liked with that though is while he was asking them to do those things, I didn't see him really monitoring how they were responding. He was looking to see that they were doing a thing, but I would have liked him to circulate around more to see what their answers were. And to stamp some of those or elevate those, and or to see if there are others that are maybe writing, but they're missing it.
Any other final reflections here? Y'all don't seem as excited about this video as I feel. Nadia, literally every time Nadia and I watch this video, I'm messaging Nadia on the side. Yeah. This is I just want to be like super clear that this is an example of really strong instruction. All of the videos we watch today have strengths. But this guy is a pro. Like, he clearly knows his content. He clearly loves his content. But a lot of times, especially in high school, I'm sure my secondary people know, in high school, it can be really easy to get teachers who know their stuff, but then they do a lot of the talking. This guy knows his stuff, but how many questions did he ask in just 10 minutes? And how many times did he push kids to say, how do you know? Tell me more. Tell me more. Kids were, at times you could see kids being like, oh, well, I thought my answer was good enough, right? But then they were pushed to like come up with a more clear explanation, and his pushing got them there. Nadia, Abby, do you want anything?
Yeah, and I was going to say, and even with that, there's always going to be something to tweak, adjust, fine tune, which is why it's so great to have a coaching tool that's non-evaluative, right? It's so great to have a process that's non-evaluative, because now we get to say, yeah, you are clearly demonstrating excellence in your role as in your professional role as a teacher and your professional expectations as a teacher. And now we're just thinking about other ways for students to be able to demonstrate their learning throughout the lesson. Now we're just looking for another way to think about how to transfer some of that ownership in these kinds of ways. So now, like, all the things that we say, again, are just aligned to a vision for strong instruction and get to be given and delivered in a way that's non-evaluative, because this teacher is awesome. And it's like, great, like, let's talk about this lesson or this moment or this strategy. And it takes some of that emphasis off of them as a person and more about the lesson and the decisions made in the lesson. So yeah, just wanted to darken the lines around that.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
No. All right. Can I get, let's see, who have we not called on today? Jade from Winnebago. Can you come off mute and read out our key idea for this section?
Sorry, couldn't figure out the mute thing for a second. Giving teachers HQIM in an annual evaluation isn't enough. That helps them start to understand the bar for excellence, but it doesn't help them figure out how to get there. That's where coaching comes in. If we want teachers making instructional decisions that improves learning outcomes for students, we need to provide more structured guidance and build their own sense of self-efficacy.
Awesome. So with that, we're excited to dig into the coaching segment of our time together. And really quick note, so I want to name that a lot of us know what coaching is and actively do it as parts of our roles. But we didn't want to take that for granted, because often we use language differently. We're bringing in different contexts. We're bringing in different experiences and expectations in that kind of work. So think about this more as like a norming conversation or level setting than like a direct instruction kind of conversation. So I just wanted to name that, because even I remember when I first became an instructional coach, no one really sat me down and was like, here is exactly what instructional coaching is. They were just like, here's a rubric, here's some tools, here's your schedule, you need to start getting into classrooms, right? So this conversation could just be a great way for us to all be on the same page and think, well, how do we really think about coaching and define that in our work and in our roles? So just wanted to name that. Okay, so with that, here is a working definition that we want to provide. Let's go ahead and have Sean McDiffit. If you can come off mute and read our definition, that'd be great, please.
Instructional coaching can be described as the non-evaluative cycle of classroom observations and brief conversations intended to improve classroom instruction and student outcomes.
Beautiful. So when we think of instructional coaching as most comprehensive end of a coaching spectrum, it includes things like goal setting against a mutually agreed upon rubric, feedback, support, resources, etc., data analysis, and so much more than that. I just put up a couple of books that I'm sure a lot of us as professionals have seen, heard of, read. And so, yes, like when we think about coaching in big terms, this is essentially what we tend to think about. Now, a lot of you from your pre-survey indicated a belief, right, that coaching really can be effective to move teachers, and also a belief that all teachers, regardless of where they are in their career, first-year teacher, 30-year veteran, can benefit from some kind of instructional coaching. So I want to also make sure we surface that. But when we really think about coaching, it really does have the potential to be transformational, right? Both within the walls of our schools, but really within the larger context of our community and society. So we wanted to make sure we just take a second to think about a theory of action around coaching. And specifically, a theory of action articulates like a desired outcome we want to be true and the activities, resources, and approaches needed to achieve it. So it helps us answer, what is the work, why are we doing it, and how will we do it? So there is like a working theory of action that we have around coaching that we wanted to make sure we share today. So first, if coaches and coaching structures are effective, then teachers will deepen their knowledge and that ability to deliver strong classroom instruction. Then schools and building leaders will be better equipped to develop and retain their talent. Just a quick beat here. If we reflect on teacher retention, especially right now, when people feel invested in and developed, they are more likely to stay, right? We see and hear stories all the times of folks who are like, I'm staying in the classroom because I'm part of a really awesome school community, or I'm really supported by my leaders. And so we often understand the impact of coaching on kids, but we also don't often take time to think about the impact that coaching can have on things like teacher retention and teacher satisfaction. So we want to take a quick beat there. So again, if coaching and coaching structures are effective, then students will have stronger academic performance and experience a learning environment that maintains those high expectations. And they are the ultimate recipients of, or they're like our ultimate outcome when we think about our theory of action. Like why we even have coaching and coaching structures in place is because ultimately we do think it can move the needle for teaching and learning for kids. So in your handout, you have a space to just like stop and take a quick note for yourself. What's resonating with you about that theory of action for coaching? What's challenging you? And what are you more curious about? We'll just give you about 90 seconds to stop and reflect in writing in your handout. And Amisha, if you want to go back to that theory of action slide to slide 31, we can do that. What's resonating with you? What's challenging? What are you more curious about? All right, thanks for taking some time to think through that. Let's go ahead and pop over to slide 33. Okay, so now for some fun for us as a group. Okay, so as you can see, hopefully you like my little meme, that moment where you can't find the right words, right? So we've all been in a situation where we're like using a term, using a phrase, but really in our profession sometimes, especially, we use a lot of words and terms interchangeably to talk about different aspects of our job. Do we ever really stop to think though about what these words mean, when we're using them, how we're using them? So we're just like, wanted to pressure test this a little bit. So in just a second, there will be a Zoom poll broadcasted on your screen. There will be a statement, and you will have to choose the term that best describes that statement. So again, it's up to you how you use it, how you tend to think about it. And again, I know some of you are in a group, so you can hash that out with your team and be like, ooh, maybe it could be interesting to hear one person sees it one way and another person sees it a different way. So with that, there's no right or wrong answer, but yes, let's go ahead and play this out. If you haven't responded, take the next 15 or so seconds to, again, there's no right or wrong. Just go with your gut. It's very interesting. Okay, now let's go ahead and show these results. So first, take a second and look them over. Yeah, so go ahead, come off mute, and we'd love to hear from you. What is surprising you about this exercise? What did this exercise make you wonder, think, realize? Go ahead, come off mute. Let's go ahead, chat it out. You can also drop any reflections in the chat. That's fine too. We'd love to hear from you.
I like this activity. I feel really strongly in clarifying a common language when you're talking with a group. I've ran into that countless times, and sometimes it's the source for like disagreements or just like not fully understanding each other when really like we were talking about different things or we thought we were talking. Yeah. So common language is huge. And I feel like this was just a really great way to see it, where even though like on that first one, 82% of us said fidelity check, there are still like about 20% of us that had a different interpretation of, and not saying that that's right or wrong, but just we had a different interpretation of it. And so I think this is just a really good way to visualize for a group to see that there are different definitions of these terms. So taking this away to prove this point in other situations in my district.
Nice. Thank you so much for coming up and sharing that. And that's exactly why we wanted to do this, because sometimes, I mean, when you're thinking about that experience as a teacher, right? If you're like, okay, well, we have walkthrough scheduled, that can flutter up all kinds of different experiences, internal reactions from a teacher, right? Like they are also trying to figure out what that means. Because in one district it might have meant one thing, somewhere else, what's my experience, et cetera. So we're all bringing in our own set of habits around these terms and structures and activities that it's really important to surface and name. Yes, so for the purposes of this call, I'm realizing that we didn't really explicitly name that on the slide. Like, how are we using some of these terms? So that first one, we do tend to think of that as a fidelity check. That second one, being in classrooms together, data or information, we do tend to think of that as walkthroughs, right? It's just I'm walking through to gather information to figure out a plan. That third one, being in classrooms with the express intent of studying instructional decisions, we think of those as observations. And that last one is like a check-in. It's just that quick bite-sized follow-up after a previous conversation or observation that we've had. Maybe it's a quick sticky note, quick email, something like that. So just wanted to make sure that, yes, you all know how we're using some of these terms too. So yay, thanks. Okay, so key idea. Let's go ahead and can we have Amy Mundi? Is it Mundi or Mundy?
Mundil.
Oh, that's an L. I'm sorry. I thought that was
Okay.
two. Okay. Go ahead. Can you read our key idea?
Absolutely. There's no right or wrong way to visit a classroom, but not all classroom visits are for the same purpose, and not all classroom visits are for coaching. Being intentional with why we're in classrooms helps to create a culture and climate of openness to feedback and coaching for staff. Being in classrooms with intention not only builds trust with teachers, but creates efficacy in leaders.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I would even say, so that one's efficiency in leaders. And I do want to make sure, no, that's okay. And I want to make sure we name that too, because it helps us not overthink why we're going into a space. If I know this is just a fidelity check, let me not stress about it. I'm looking for these quick things. So now I can be really streamlined in my approach versus, okay, I'm planning for observations. Let me think, okay, I need protected time to really sit into a space and like be present and study the instructional decisions here. Let me check in with my front desk folks to make sure I'm not bothered during that time or pulled out of that observation. So I can really spend some time thinking about instructional practices. So thank you so much. And I'll go ahead and pass things over to Namisha.
All right, so in the spirit of aligning on common definitions, we're going to define some terms here. We want to be clear that coaching can happen in a variety of ways, some more intensive and more comprehensive than others, right? We want to be super explicit that instructional coaching doesn't have to be all or nothing, right? Some of you might be on this call thinking, I'm the only person on my leadership team at my school. Like, I cannot instructionally coach all 15 of my teachers, right? I don't want that to stop you from like moving in that direction towards coaching. If you don't have the bandwidth to engage with every single teacher in 2-week cycles of observations and debriefs, that doesn't mean you can't still coach teachers to some extent. So we're going to define some of the terms here on what we have started calling sort of our continuum of coaching, from less to more intensive. So on the less intensive end, we have what we call support. This is when you're providing resources to teachers that can have a positive impact on student learning. So resources could mean all kinds of things. It could mean a suggestion to go to a specific training. Maybe you've adopted new HQIM and you think your teachers need to go to some XYZ training about it. It could be books or book studies, articles, sharing videos, sharing planning guides or protocols, any of those. Then we get a little bit more intensive when we are giving feedback. So this is when you observe and give the teacher some bite-sized suggestions for improvement that can have a positive impact on student learning. This feedback could be given via email afterwards. You might leave a quick sticky note like we heard Lucas talk about earlier. It could be a quick verbal aside with the teacher, maybe after the class period in the hallway. The key thing here is that it's pretty low. There's not much it's pretty low lift in the sense that there's not much work afterwards. You're just kind of quickly giving that bite-sized piece of feedback. And then, of course, what we're talking about when we talk about instructional coaching is on the most intensive end of this continuum. But when done well, it can also be incredibly impactful, right? So we're defining coaching as engaging in cycles of observations and dialogic conversations where teachers get to set measurable goals, and then they get consistent feedback and support to accomplish those goals. This level of coaching, whatever kind of cadence is in, maybe it's like every few months, every couple of weeks, whatever it is, this level of coaching can result in both technical and adaptive changes for teachers. So yes, it's the most comprehensive and intensive on this continuum, but it has the potential to have huge impacts on teachers' investment and their development in their own practice and pedagogy. It's been a while since we did a breakout. It's time for another one. We're going to send you to breakout rooms in a minute where we'd love for you to take a few minutes to discuss these questions. So take this space to really reflect on the working definitions that we've just shared. Which of these do you feel like you have been doing the most of in your current work? Support, feedback, or coaching? And what might be the impact on staff of using words like that interchangeably? And what, if any, mindset shift do you feel like you need in order to make a clear distinction between coaching and evaluations? I see a question in the chat to put the definitions. Nope, never mind. That's a different question. Abby has put these questions in the chat, so you have them once you are in your breakout rooms to reference, and we'll take about 5 minutes in breakouts to chat, and then we'll come back home. All right, welcome back. That felt really quick. I'd love to hear from 2 people. Just any reflection or kind of takeaway from your discussion.
Sure, I'll speak. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
So I'm pretty new to the role of 5 through 8 principal here in Winnebago. And I would say on a daily basis, my major role is just support. I want to make sure that the teachers have what they need to be successful on a daily basis and free from as many interruptions as possible. But I've done a little bit of coaching, not really much on the evaluation piece yet, but done a little coaching as well, trying to help how to be more successful.
Thank you for sharing. Let's hear from one more person.
I've been hired specifically as an instructional coach at my school. And that was something that we made very clear at the beginning, is that mine is a non-evaluative position. But teachers have been very receptive to coming in and asking, and, I will pop in several times during the day. It's very common, feels very comfortable. Our PLCs are structured so that we have all the specialists are present, classroom teachers, myself. So we're set up pretty sweet. I think it will really be turning the needle this year because teachers are just so comfortable and the dialogue is so open.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing. We're gonna head to lunch in just a little bit. We're a few minutes behind, but you're still gonna get a full hour for lunch. So before we break for lunch, let's just take 3 minutes right now to independently stop and jot some reflections to these 2 questions in your participant handout. Take 3 minutes independent work time. All right, we have one parting thought before we break for lunch. Jason from Garden County, can you come off mute and read our key idea for us?
Sure. While we often use words surrounding the teacher development experience and education interchangeably, having clear distinctions can be a way to hold ourselves accountable to providing the specific support that teachers and students need for true school transformation. By refining our language around coaching, we can not only refine our purpose, but our impact.
Thank you so much. And with that, we will break for 1 hour for lunch. It's 12:03 right now. Let's just round it up to 12:05. Please rejoin this call at 1:05 for our afternoon have a wonderful lunch, and we'll see you in an hour.
And share your number in the chat. Let's see how picky of eaters you all are. Oh, this is so fun. Oh, this is so fun. Honestly, some of these, I've never seen some numbers this high before. And I've done this activity with a lot of different groups. Like some of these numbers are high, y'all. This is
I
hilarious.
take like picky food to a whole new level. It's like a whole anxiety trigger thing for me. I just can't with food. If I didn't have to eat, I wouldn't.
So funny.
But yet I'm still overweight. I didn't figure that out. I don't know.
Stop. Man, usually I'm like, if it's in front of me, I'm going to eat it. It's like, yeah, it's so fun. Well, thank you all so much for engaging in that. It was just really fun to see some of these numbers. Honestly, it's like so interesting. I love it. I want to come over.
When Nadia planned this icebreaker and I first saw it, I like immediately got offended because I'm vegetarian and it's like a pet peeve of mine when people say I'm picky, but I just don't eat things because I was born and raised vegetarian. But that's why my number is 15.
So you know what, we could say selective eater. So that way, because picky might have negative connotations, and you're not picky, you know, you just like what you like. You are highly selective with the things that you're interested in. So I know, where's the chocolate? Oh, Cindy. This is so fun. Well, Katie, I'm coming over to your house for dinner. You have to cook for me one of these days because I want to know what you're making, girl.
Turkey sandwiches with nothing on it, cereal, frozen pizza, chicken nuggets, you name it. Pretty much imagine a toddler's diet. Probably less than that.
Well, thank you all so much. Hopefully that exercise put some smiles on some folks' faces. And if you have colleagues in the room, maybe you learn something new about somebody that you already know. So thank you all so much. Okay, so with that, we are going to branch into a different end of the conversation, which, you know, we like to say at TNTP, sometimes we're going to get a little bit warm and fuzzy. We're going to turn the lens inward. Because oftentimes we forget that as coaches, we are people, and as people, we bring a lot to the space. And taking that time as leaders to be able to reflect on the self is, you know, unfortunately, sometimes it feels like a luxury, right? You're constantly busy, you're constantly doing for your team, for your students. It's not often that we get to sit down and reflect on us, the self. And because so many of you are the unit of change when you think about improvement in student level outcomes, it's important for us to spend some time thinking about ourselves and what we bring to the table. And, you know, in all kinds of ways, right? What we bring to the table when we think about engaging in coaching relationships and conversations with our teachers. So with that, let's go ahead and dig into a quick conversation. So before we can dig into the state of coaching at your respective schools, we do have to make sure we're kind of on the same page around a distinction between culture and climate. So understanding this difference in particular can help us more accurately capture the state of coaching as it actually is on, at our schools. So let's go through some definitions and examples. So an org culture often refers to the organization's identity that's developed either strategically through the establishment of things like values and norms, or organically over time. So we can think of culture as the way things are done. And, let's use data as a lens. I feel like so many of us are data driven anyway. Like that could be a cool, just common language for us to use. So let's use data as a lens to help us make this distinction between culture and climate really clear. Can we go ahead and have Jim Glenn Hash, can you come off mute and read our example, please, for culture?
Sure. A school cultivates a data-driven culture by incorporating data cycles into PLCs and facilitating quarterly all staff setbacks where school-wide data, assessments, discipline, etc., is reviewed and analyzed.
Excellent. So this is a perfect example of a culture system that a school might have adopted, right? They're like, we're a data-driven culture. We're really passionate about that here. So here are some structures and things that we put in place to help us attend to that. Now, climate is different, right? So climate actually refers to the ways that individuals experience or perceive the work environment. Now, that is influenced by the behavior, decision-making, communication styles, even of leadership and peers and colleagues. So let's go ahead and have Kara Beckenhauer. Did I say that right?
You did.
Okay, can you go ahead and read our example for climate?
Sure. Every quarter, the assistant principal ranks academic data by teacher from highest to lowest and publicly shares things to avoid based on information they gathered from observing the most struggling classrooms.
So we laugh, but let me tell you, I've actually seen things like this happen. So when we think about climate, we think about how individuals feel when operating in that culture and, the different school decisions that might affect the general mood of an environment, right? So climate is that feeling, that mood, the impact I'm having at an emotional level, right? That's that climate versus culture, which are like the way things done, that more tactical end. So now so how would a leader's decision, right? That particular decision around data, how would that decision impact the climate around data at a school like that? Maybe it would even impact how people feel around observations. So let's go ahead and have some folks come off mute and share. How would that decision impact the climate?
I'll share. I think that teachers would always feel very defensive when anyone came into their room, and they do not want observations. That would be like something to fear because they know that they're going to get they could get publicly shamed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you agree with that, you can use a reaction. Like, I love, me, I love reactions. But feel free to use a reaction to show how we're responding. But yes, thank you so much for coming off mute and sharing that. So now we're actually ready to start thinking about, our own spaces. So you'll see a series of statements. And what we're going to do is respond to whether that statement is true or false. And so as a barometer for ourselves, think about, okay, like, is this true or false, like 50% or more of the time, right? So if you're like, well, sometimes that's true, or sometimes that's false, or that's false with one person or true with one person, I want you to think about the larger context and within which you're working, right? So you'll see a couple of statements, just true, false statements. There are about 5 of them. And we want you to rate true or false to each of them. So we'll give you about 2 minutes or so to respond to these. Just go with your gut. You don't have to overthink these, but go with your gut. For folks who aren't in school-based roles, maybe you can think about times when you have gone to a school site to do work or engage with the staff there. Like, what are you perceiving as some of the energy that you're encountering when you're in schools? Because now you get to see it across different contexts too. So. Awesome. Thank you all so much for your vulnerability and sharing that. And we see some more responses are starting to trickle in, which is awesome. We got about 84% participation here. We know that some of you all are in groups and probably really having a robust conversation on mute about this. But let's go ahead and share some of the results. Go ahead and take 20 seconds and just let some of those responses sink in. Awesome. Okay, so let's go ahead and get to our next slide. We're actually doing really good on time. So let's spend a few minutes in the chat. Based on those poll results, how would you describe the climate around instructional coaching in CSI schools right now? And what makes you say that? Drop some responses in the chat and then we'll dig in.
I guess on speaking for my specific school, teachers have been very open to having coaching come in. I have had teachers where I've provided feedback to them. They've been very gracious with it. They want to have deeper conversations. They will come seek me out as well. So I actually answered true to everything because in our particular situation, that's what it is. Teachers want to get better. They want to drive instruction. They want student improvement. They want the feedback. It's very much a collective effort here.
There are some really, thank you so much for sharing. And there's some really cool things in the chat because, yes, that's true. Like we can speak to our own respective positions, but we also recognize that as a whole, like CSI schools impact thousands of young people, right? And so it could be interesting to just get a data point when we're thinking about the breadth of folks involved in this cohort. Like, what is a general state of coaching and feedback across our CSI schools? And ultimately too, like this is a cross section. We're seeing schools of different sizes and different parts of the state, so this is really interesting to even think about it within the context of geography. Deidre, you said something really cool. I wonder if you could come off mute and talk a little bit more about that, please.
Sure. It seemed to me that teachers wanted the feedback. That was pretty high, but then if they want the feedback, why are they not necessarily, now I can't remember the actual questions, of course, but maybe it is the observation. Thank you. Maybe it is the method that's being used that makes them feel insecure about it. I'm not sure. Yeah, because here it's 45% look forward to or request the observations, and it could be the requesting. Maybe they don't necessarily want to request, but maybe they look forward, but yet 82% welcome the feedback. So I would be interested to have more teacher voice in asking what feedback, how, you know, when you think of feedback, what does that look like to you?
You know which one I felt particularly stood out to me was number 3. Teachers believe that regardless of tenure, teachers should get coaching. I think that one's so interesting to me. You know, we think about teachers who are like, oh, I've been doing this for X number of years, you know, and I'm like, I'm just always so curious about that. And it was 58% of folks responded false to that, but 42% responded true. So.
We kind of pushed in our district like a while ago where we say like, okay, if you look at the NFL, there's still quarterback coaches. And it's like, we see those quarterbacks as professional, the highest in their field, the best of the best, but yet they still have specific position coaches. And so as educators, like there's always something more to learn. And don't we want to emulate that mindset of we grow and learn every single day, and learning doesn't stop when you're a child, even as an adult. And so we kind of tried to phase it or phrase it that way. And just a good analogy that we always go back to when we're explaining what our position is to new teachers.
But to add on that, just like in those professional sports and things, people have their opinions about the coaches, and you get this first year new coach that comes in, and what do they know? And they don't know what we do here, and they don't know how things are. So then, but I think generally speaking, teachers are lifelong learners, and they want to improve and they want to get better. But especially the ones that have been through some of the CSI work in the past, it just makes them put kind of a guard up and be a little bit hesitant. But once they see where you're coming from and who is doing the coaching and how it's being approached, I think that'll make all the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kayla, is it Kayla Payton? Is that how you say your name?
Yes, that is.
Okay, great. You never know. But still, yeah, I mean, and something you said too around like just the challenge of shifting culture, shifting climate. It takes a lot of time to do that, right? So yeah, thank you all so much for your honesty, for your candor. You know, like it's good to just have it in this kind of like almost like black and white kind of way, you know, because it does help us think through, okay, well, what is the state of things happening across the board, and what are some contributing factors? So let's go ahead and think about that in the next slide. So now we're going to get an opportunity to take our reflection one more step. So let's get honest with where we are, why we're there, because that will ultimately help us in charting a path forward. Now, some of you have named, oh, well, the climate and culture around it is really positive. That's awesome. Maybe you can spend some of that time, right, thinking about or reflecting on the conditions or decisions that actually facilitated that, because that didn't happen on its own, right? There were some decisions that were made, communication, ownership, there's probably vulnerability that needed to be expressed throughout the process to create those kinds of environments at your respective places too, right? So at the end of the day, it's always a series of like micro decisions, and that is also kind of empowering because we can also make a new set of decisions to shift culture and shift climate, even when it's challenging. So posts are totally anonymous. Don't feel shy about being vulnerable in the Padlet. Like, let's name some of the things. If we're noticing that, man, maybe the climate at our school around coaching isn't as open as we want it to be, let's dig into why. What are some of the things that could be facilitating that? Because ultimately, to speak transparently, if you answered false to any of the questions, then it's honestly an opportunity to reflect on the climate, right? Because that means that there is something contributing to a more closed off disposition to coaching and that we want to investigate a little bit further. Awesome. So Abby has shared the link to the Padlet. Awesome. We have some great responses flooding in. Just take about the next 45 seconds to make sure that your voice is shared in the Padlet. And if you've already posted, go through and read some of these responses. Awesome. Thank you so much for your responses. We're excited to continue to dig in. And, just as another opportunity when we're thinking about this space, what's great is that folks are here from across the state, as some of us are naming in the Padlet, things around size, capacity, especially in smaller districts, and even in larger districts where it's like, well, we're adopting something new or lack of clarity around roles, even like there are opportunities for folks to be able to connect across lines of difference, share practices, but also connect with folks from similar contexts. So just one more opportunity when we think about chances to get into breakout rooms of folks that we may or may not have normal touch points with, right? There are opportunities for folks to share context and be like, okay, let's problem solve together. Great. So let's go ahead and look at our next slide. And can we have Rebecca Miller? Can you come off mute and read that quote for us? An essential component of coaching is supporting others to become conscious of their belief system about children, learning students of color, immigrants, and so on. But before we can engage in this work as coaches, we need to become aware of our own beliefs. Yes, beautiful. Thank you so much. So with that, let's dig in. Let's do some of that. So as we know, our values are very much so an internal driver or a compass for a lot of how we show up in our work, right? And we can't disassociate ourselves from our values as leaders because they make up a big part of who we are as just humans. Now, our values shape our beliefs, And those beliefs end up being our truths and our convictions, the things that ultimately drive our behaviors and how we show up in the work, how we respond to situations, and, how we move, whether it's in conflict, in tension, or in joy and collaboration, right? So, and finally, ultimately, all these things are shaped by our unique identities, right? Ourselves, our lived experiences, where we come from, and those things all work to make us who we are. What's powerful about demonstrating some of these different terms in this way is that we see that there's a relationship between them. It's not like one comes first or one only linearly affects the other. They all mutually reinforce and shape one another. But it's, again, important to understand that these things are all like shaped by who we are, and including the relationships that we build with our teachers, including the way that we lead our schools and we lead our teams. So that also means that we can't divorce ourselves from the experiences that we've had. And all of us on this call have had different experiences with coaching personally. So with that,
Can I add one quick thing?
yes, please. Sorry,
I just wanted to name, I think, so I saw a few comments in the Padlet around time being an issue and like capacity when you have so much on your plate, which is absolutely understandable. But then I look at this diagram as well, and my immediate thought is like, all of us, students, teachers, everyone on this call, like when we're pressed for time or pushed into a corner, the way we react without thinking about it is so heavily dependent on these values and beliefs that are like intrinsic to us. So if we want to change what we prioritize and how we behave in certain situations, that means we have to go back probably and do a bunch of like annoying values and mindset work, because when you're down to the wire, how you react, you're going to fall back on your like what you're used to doing. So that's why it's just so important to like, we want to give this space today, give you the time and space to really dig into those values and beliefs, because they impact how you show up.
Yeah, thank you so much for naming that, Namisha. And because of time, like we didn't budget, like we don't have time to really dig into some of the research behind that. We actually did at our statewide professional learning last year, and it was a pretty valuable set of exercises. So we can see if we can get some of those resources to you as well. But it's all about exactly that, right? When we're pressed, when we are experiencing an environmental trigger of some kind of way, like, or of some kind, how that makes us fall back on internalized beliefs that we don't even realize we have. Every single person, regardless of who you are, where you come from, we all have them. And so it's important to just take the time in a safe space when we're all calm, our cortisol levels are chill, you know what I mean? We're not stressed out really right now, to do some of this reflection work, because then we can start to reprogram and create those pathways that are really healthy for us. Okay, so like I said, we all bring in stuff to the space from our own lived experiences. So this is a kind of a funny way, but still like, hopefully very pertinent. On a scale of chihuahuas, which best represents how you experienced being instructionally coached in the past? And maybe, if you haven't ever experienced instructional coaching in the past, I'm wondering which of these numbers might speak to that. So promise is a reason why we're doing this. It's not just a silly, cute exercise. Let's hear from a 6. Can someone come off mute? And if you put a 6 in the chat, go ahead and share a little bit more. It looks like someone from the Betts Bellevue team might have put a 6 in the chat. No, okay, well, let's pop over to John Pickenpowell, who put a 9. Can we hear a little bit more from you?
Hi, so there's a team of us in here, but basically we put a 9 because it kind of looked like a situation where you kind of fake it till you make it. Put a smile on your face, but it might not be a real smile, and you just kind of keep doing things until you figure out what works.
Nice. Thanks for sharing. 3 is a funny one. I want to hear someone who put a 3 in the chat.
I'll go. I put a 3 because I remember being a new teacher and I welcomed the instructional coach, but the eyes like a deer in the headlight look, you don't know what to expect, but I'm accepting the help.
Nice. Well, feels pretty good. It looks like only me and Namisha really put 2s in the chat, which is great. I'm so glad none of y'all are bringing that baggage with you to your coaching roles. But yeah, I mean, I'll speak personally too. Like some of my first experiences coaching were very, very, very punitive. They didn't feel supportive. It was always, here are all the things you're doing wrong. I feel like after coaching conversations, I always felt really small. And that was frustrating because I got conflicting information because my data was really good, right? My scores or whatever were really good, but I got hypercritical feedback. And then I actually had a coach, I mean, no shots at that leader in particular. They were wearing a dozen hats and we're just kind of going with the flow, going with emotions. But I did get a dedicated coach, and then that made me kind of redevelop trust again in the coaching process. Really built a great relationship. The feedback was consistent. It was evidence-based. And then when I ultimately became a coach, I reflected a lot on that experience, and I was like, man, like I want to be more like Miss Julia. You know what I mean? Then I'm not going to name the first person, but I was like, I really want to be a coach more like her, and then that really ended up shaping me as an individual when I started to interface a lot with leaders. So all that to say, we all bring our own respective experiences into the coaching space, right? So with that, you're going to go into breakout rooms and have an opportunity just to chat. So pick one of the 2 prompts. What's resonating with you at this point in the session? What's challenging you, if anything? Or B, how has your experience being coached or not coached shaped how you think of teacher development in your current work? So you can pick one of those 2 prompts. Abby, drop them in the chat. Go ahead, you'll spend like 2.5, 3 minutes in breakout rooms, and we'll start to wrap this portion of our time together. Awesome. So we know that was really short, but hopefully you were able to still have a cool conversation. I definitely was able to join one that was awesome. So thank you for letting me pop in. But ultimately, you know, a big takeaway from this time is thinking about the ways in which we internalize all kinds of beliefs. Sometimes these beliefs serve us and sometimes they don't serve us. So we'll go ahead and talk about that a little bit more in our next slide. So we are going to spend some time thinking about how are the beliefs we carry serving us or not. So we're going to identify two types of beliefs, two that do serve us and two that don't serve us, as well as those actions that might stem or emerge from those beliefs. And there's a lot of text on the slide. Let's go ahead and orient to the left side of the screen first, right? So when we think about a belief that does serve me, let's go ahead and have Lindsay Luli from LPS. Can you come off mute and read the belief that serves me side?
The belief that serves me, I believe that my teachers need development in classroom instruction and stronger strategies for HQIM implementation. An action that emerges from this belief is that I hire professionals or partner with my ESU to lead required development with teachers.
Yes, absolutely. Now, conversely, let's go ahead and look at the other side of that, right? Because we do have beliefs that sometimes don't serve us. And can I go ahead and have Katie Danielski? Can you come off mute and read the side around beliefs that a belief that does not serve me?
I believe that I'll get pushback and teachers might quit if I push them too hard or have difficult conversations with them about how kids are doing in their classes. An action that emerges from this belief is that I don't talk one-on-one with teachers about their data or give them direct feedback about the instructional decisions they're making that may be contributing to student outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Jim, I see the head nod. Yeah, see, but no, it's true. Like, hopefully when we see these things juxtapose one another, juxtapose against each other, we can see a little bit more clearly. It's like, yeah, we all might have beliefs that do serve us or might not always serve us, right? But those beliefs don't just stop there. They always result in some kind of action that we're not even aware is taking place or happening. So we want to give us some work time. Let's take around 8 minutes on your own, and we're holding you accountable to this, okay? Really take the time right now to identify some of those beliefs, the ones that do serve, right? What are the ones that you want to hold on to and keep and be like, yes, these are the beliefs that are really serving me and my team, and here are the actions that I can directly connect that to. And then do the same thing, right? Really surface for yourself what are those beliefs that might not be serving you. Maybe it's, man, like, maybe it stems from the fact that you've never taught a certain content before, or you are a relatively young school leader, right? Maybe there are things around being in a new context or a new school site, and therefore there are actions that are stemming from that that might not be serving you. And that's okay to name, right? But really take the time to do that here in this space where it's safe and you have the time to actually dedicate towards that.
One other thing I'll add is if you're struggling to like clearly identify some of your beliefs, because maybe you've never like put words to it, it might be in that case easier to think about what are some actions that I do that I think are serving me, and what are some actions that aren't, and then kind of go backwards from there. What beliefs might be driving how I'm operating on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, maybe there's a classroom you avoid observing all the time, right? That's an action. Is there a belief that might be contributing to that action, etc.? So. If you are already done with this exercise, can you go ahead and give like a thumbs up reaction on Zoom so that we can see? Okay, assistant thumbs up. Okay, take the next 15 or so seconds to wrap up your belief and action statements. Yeah, thanks, Amisha. Okay, so you don't have to share at all what your statements were, but just out of curiosity, can we just get a high level? Was that a difficult exercise? Was that an easy exercise? What was that like for you? We'd love to just hear from one or two folks. Was it uncomfortable? Was it comfortable?
For me,
oh, sorry.
Oh, so for me, I think it's just a really good self-reflection on what we've already talked about. And, you know, if our beliefs are even still the same, even after you've given us all this quality information about coaching and so to me, it just, you know, brings to point that this is what I'm currently doing, and this is how maybe I can improve upon my actions as a instructional coach.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Sean. Really appreciate it. Yes, 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 yes. Awesome. One other thought reaction. What was that exercise like for you?
I didn't think it was too difficult, but it was interesting to go ahead and do this and be like, yeah, these things that I knew were true, but then an action that emerges from the beliefs, I guess that was the part that was probably the most refreshing from this exercise, I guess.
Nice. Awesome. Yay. Okay. Well, again, this isn't something that you just only get to do here, right? Like at any point, if you find yourself like, let me just do a quick pause, a pulse check. How am I feeling? What's going on? Feel free to engage in this framework at any point, because it could just be a good self-check as you continue to think about coaching and all of its complexities, and as well as how that connects to your own leadership. So just thank you all so much for going through that experience with us and going through that process with us. And let's go ahead and close out with a key idea from this segment. And let's go ahead and hear from Heidi Farmer. Can you come off mute and share our key idea, please?
Yes. Leading with vulnerability allows teams to build trust that is crucial to building a community that is open and receptive to consistent observations and feedback. It's vulnerable to take stock in what is and what is not serving us, whether that's our beliefs, actions, or decisions. Vulnerability and intentional trust building are antidotes to the barriers we often encounter when trying to move the needle for teaching and learning.
Beautiful. Let's let that sit for a sec. I'll pass things off to Namisha.
All right, this brings us to our last heavy thinking chunk for today. So now that you've started to kind of mine and diagnose some of your own beliefs and how that might be influencing the culture in your context, you're better prepared to start articulating a vision. So we've talked about the current state. Now let's start to talk about what's your ideal state? What do you want the culture and climate around coaching to look, sound, and feel like? Can I get, let's see, Danielle Roby? Can you come off mute and read out this quote for us?
I would love to. I was just texting one of the people that I coach because they were like, I'm in room, blah, blah, blah. Okay. According to Merriam-Webster, vision is defined as the active power of imagination. When you apply vision to the future, you can create a mental picture that can be used to direct your actions. Vision serves as a guide and be used to provide a sense of purpose.
That is what, thank you for reading that out. That's what we're going to task you with starting to define in our next work chunk. So as you, in a moment, start thinking about a vision for coaching in your context, we encourage you to consider these questions that you see here on the slide. How do you want teachers to engage in observations and coaching? How do you want teachers to feel about observations and coaching? And what impact do you want coaching to have on student outcomes? So how should this kind of trickle down to the student experience? So in a minute, we're going to give you about 10 minutes of some more independent work time to start drafting your vision for coaching. All of these guiding questions that are here on this slide, you also have them in your participant handout. We're asking that you use these questions to help you develop some compelling responses that can help you start to solidify a vision for your school's coaching culture. And if you don't work at a school, think about the schools that you support, and you might reframe some of these questions for your particular context. Or if you're here like in support of a specific CSI school, think about that school. And then make sure you give your responses some serious thought over the next 10 minutes. After this independent work time, we are going to get the chance to workshop our ideas with some colleagues in another breakout room. So do be prepared to share. Are there any questions? All right, we will do 10 more minutes of independent work time. Of some we're going to do one more round of some independent work where we're now going to give you the chance to go back to your vision, and based on the conversation you just had with your colleagues and some of the questions and feedback you got, take a second pass at your vision. What do you need to strengthen, clarify, or tighten in the language of that vision? I do want to I popped into a couple of different rooms. So I think this might be a trend across rooms, but I want to encourage everyone in whatever format you're drafting this vision to get as specific as you can, not just around the culture you want, but the beliefs and actions that will get you there. So maybe you've identified, hey, I want a collaborative culture or where teachers are receptive to coaching. Excellent. That's the culture you want to create. What are the actions that are going to get you there? What are the actions the leadership needs to take? What are the actions teachers need to take? What beliefs do teachers need to have? How can you cultivate those beliefs? So try to start getting into that level of specificity, and not just like, what's the culture I want, but what are the actions that will get us there? Are there any questions?
I just want to offer one suggestion to the group. So like, you know, I mentioned this in one of our breakouts, but again, just a quick shout out to Maywood. And when thinking about shifting some of that culture and climate around coaching and really building that at their schools, one of the things we talked about was, okay, let's set a target. Like, how many observations do y'all want to get done in X time frame? And then, you know, Lucas was like 6 per teacher. And Cindy immediately was like, whoa, you know, but it was cool because it was so ambitious. And now they've knocked out the vast majority of those. Now, I want to say, let's think about a direct impact of that. Now we, as you've heard, like we've had more teachers asking, okay, come in. What do you see? We want to hear more. Can you come in and observe for longer now? You know, that was not the tone or the tune that was being sung this time last year, right? But it took that consistently. It was a direct correlation between getting into classrooms a lot, high dosage, short amount of time to kind of start to shift. I'm visible, I'm here. See, when I say it's not evaluative, I really mean it. Like, I'm here to just observe and take notes and talk about instruction with you, nerd out about instruction with you. But it took multiple reps of doing that, right? So again, when we talk about getting concrete, let's get super, super, super concrete, like Demisha said. Like, what does it actually look like? What are actual behaviors and actions that we can name in service of this outcome?
All right, we'll do 7 more minutes of some independent work time. I'd love to open this space to just hear from a couple of folks what you have started to revise or refine in your vision, or what do you think you might want to revise or refine? You might not have gotten to it quite yet today, but what are you left thinking about when it comes to the culture around coaching at your school as a result of this?
We talked a lot about like coaching with clarity around all of our leaders in our buildings. So if we're giving feedback with one teacher, let's all wrap our arms around that same feedback instead of like everybody's sending a different message about what they need to work on. So really just kind of all moving in the same direction.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. And a big part of that is setting up like common systems and structures that allow you to all be aligned, right, on what this teacher is getting coached on. So I don't go in there and say something else random and take them off course, right? Well, I'm seeing Danielle in 2 different boxes now on my screen. Wild. It just now made sense in my head the way you all are sitting. Okay, let's hear from maybe 1 or 2 other people. I'm just going to call on somebody because you happen to be on my screen right now. Everett from Winnebago. Can you share either something you did revise or tighten up in your vision, or that you're thinking about for the future?
So for me, I was thinking about people in different roles who can help. So I didn't really initially consider that. So from that lens of special education, so I was thinking about extension and intervention and those types of things. And so that is something I would revise and consult there because we have an expert for that. I hope he heard me say that. Joe Googles is our expert. And so I would probably tap into him as far as this vision goes. So.
Can you say more about what you mean? Like, how is that connected to instructional coaching when you're talking about like the special ed and intervention, those kinds of things?
I don't know that. I mean, when I was an undergrad, proximity brings perspective. And so the closer you are to something, the better you understand it. And so when I chose to teach inclusion, I then started to understand what those kids specifically needed and like equity and education and LRE and all of that. And so I don't know that all gen ed teachers really can implement that like kids need them to. And so, and I don't know that I'm the person to like necessarily help them with that always either. And so that's where we need our SPED teachers to coach as well and co-teach, and our leaders of SPED to do those things too. Does that help?
In your vision for coaching at your school, you want to pull as needed, like if a teacher has a high number of special education students in their class and they need coaching on how to support those students, you're saying like you'd want to pull in the other experts that are in your community or on your team to help with that coaching. Is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I got it. Anyone else want to share before we move into our closing? Everyone's like, no, we just want to close out.
One thing,
Go ahead.
sorry. One thing that kind of got talked about within our group and then also in one of our breakouts is just when people are having to serve in dual roles, sometimes it makes that vision become a little bit blurry because you're having to bounce between the instructional coaching piece. And then we're like, I serve my district also as a BCBA. I also have a lot of background in special ed. And so then I find myself getting pulled in a lot of different directions all at once. So when you really look at that vision for coaching, just really staying true to the things that it is that you're supposed to be doing.
Love that. We prioritize what we decide to prioritize. So if we have a vision that says instructional coaching is really important and I deeply believe it's going to change things for my teachers and students, that's what we're going to default to prioritizing. Thank you for sharing that. All right, we are going to go ahead and move into our closing. We're going to share a little bit of information around the site visits. And we have a couple more things to share in a little bit, but we want to make sure we give you time in the session to do this exit survey so you don't have to worry about it later. So we're going to give you, let's do 8 minutes right now to open up the exit survey. And I would, even if you're in a room, folks, we would love for every single person who's on this call to take your own survey. And this is an opportunity for you to synthesize your learning from today, share your reflections, and also share some feedback with us. And we do take your feedback very seriously. Every time we do a session, we carefully read through the responses, identify trends, and talk about ways we can make this learning even more impactful next time. So all that being said, take 8 minutes right now to submit your survey. And then we have a couple more things to share before we are out of here. I'm going to try to be pretty brief to get us out of here just shortly after 3. And we will share all of this. We'll share all these slides, so you'll have all of this in writing. But for the regional site visits that are happening in the end of November, and I think there's one that goes into the beginning of December. For each of the site visits that we are hosting, we have not identified host schools yet. So if you would like the site visit to happen at your school, please do reach out and let us know. Obviously, if you have a team environment right now where teachers are like very skittish around having visitors in their classroom, it might not be the best, but some benefits of hosting one of these site visits. I mean, you'll get a bunch of sets of eyes on instruction at your school and students' experience at your school. You'll get some immediately applicable practice observing for strong instruction alongside your peers. And you'll get feedback specific to your school from a bunch of folks who've been doing this for a long time. So including others on this call. So if you're interested, if you think more about it, please do reach out to us. For each site visit, I will just go ahead and name, we had a bunch of people on today's call, but we will obviously need to limit attendance a little bit at the site visits, because if we have, 6 different schools coming to a single site visit and each school sends 4 people, I mean, that's like, we're getting into too many people being in classrooms at a single school. So we will need to limit attendance to those, and we will prioritize school-based leaders first for attendance, because the most important people who need to be on these site visits are principals of CSI schools. So you get that time to engage with other CSI principals and practice observing and coaching for strong instruction. And then we will share more details around all of this as we get closer to the first site visit. Here is a quick look at which schools are currently allotted for each of the site visit days. And this is based on, I think almost every school on here indicated which calendar invite for whichever site visit day you have signed up for, just so that you have that hold on your calendar. And then if anything needs to change, you know, it's still September. We have a couple of months until site visits start. So if you're like, oh, I signed up for the November 15th one, but it actually makes more sense for me to join the November 28th one, that's fine. Just let us know and we will make it work. Are there any immediate burning questions around site visits that you just can't go on without knowing the answer to?
I just have one thing to share real quick. So one of the comments that came in was around having more time with the tool, and what's going to be great with the regional site visit is that that's a lot of what that time is going to be. Oftentimes, you know, even some of the things we shared here is, man, sharpening my own lens for strong instruction. So a lot of that is going to be, let's use it, let's debrief it. How many students did you count? Did you forget to count? You know what I mean? Like, what's our evidence? Let's do that process together. So that, because ultimately, yes, like today, we went through the tool in a kind of high level cursory way, but the best way to like actually orient toward is like really use it. And that's like the whole goal of this, is to think about, well, what is our vision for strong instruction and what does it actually look like? And let's apply the language to a variety of classrooms so that we can feel confident in going back and looking at the state of strong instruction in our respective locations. So we can push student outcomes. So just wanted to layer that in and make sure we mention that too.
Thank you. Yeah, today's not the last day with this tool. We're going to keep using it. All right. Our charge for you before we meet again at our next virtual session is, first and foremost, take your learning with you. Find time to share and process with your team to further kind of contextualize what we discussed today. You had lots of time in breakouts with other folks, but we encourage you now to process with your immediate teams. And then, of course, stay tuned. Be on the lookout for an email with more details about our next session. And then I'll just make a quick plug. Nadia mentioned earlier today that we have done some statewide professional learning. We are doing a second year of that. We are offering learning around the findings from our report, The Opportunity Myth, and learning acceleration and grade level rigor. It's a one-day experience, learning experience that we're offering 3 different times in 3 different regions, open to anybody. So if you were like, hey, we enjoyed some of this learning today, it would be great if my teachers could have some of these types of conversations also. We will share out this flyer and registration link in a follow-up email. We encourage you to share it with whoever you think could benefit from that learning. It is free. Lunch is provided. It'll be me and Nadia live and in person. So come see us. Come hang out. We'll love to spend more time with you. That's all we got. Our email addresses are here. Please reach out with any questions at any time. We're here to support you however we possibly can. Thank you all so much. It was a long day of learning, lots of stuff. We so appreciate your time and everything you do for the kiddos of Nebraska. And with that, have a lovely day.